Greetings! Allow me to welcome you to For the Love of Fiction, a podcast dedicated to discussing story and character across a wide range of mediums. I am your host, Gavin Groves, and with me is my co-host, Mark Tobit.
Hello, dude. How you doing?
Bit of a pregnant pause there again, man. It's like you were waiting.
Oh, no. You got to allow for these dramatic moments.
How you doing?
Same old, man, as always.
Nothing new to report?
One or two minor things want to talk about when we get into preamble, but I don't know. It's the same old. England's getting warmer, so winter seems to be more or less past now, isn't it?
Yes.
Record high temperatures and all that good stuff. I say good stuff. That's probably not a good thing if you're actually going to...
Has there been record temperatures?
We have, dude. It's
been quite mild, thinking about it.
Yeah, no snow this year, really.
February.
Yeah. But February is normally our coldest month, and right now we seem to be experiencing record highs according to the Met Office.
That is true, actually, thinking about it. And I came home the other day, I was thinking to myself, has someone got the heating on?
Man, right now I'm in my t-shirt and shorts. So I haven't turned my heating on for more than about 5-6 days over this entire winter.
Oh, right, okay.
But that might be down to the fact it's a new build, great insulation.
So that is true.
But nonetheless, getting away from the whole potential dystopian apocalyptic symptoms that we might be experiencing for future of climate change. Yeah, I'm having a good time.
Cool. So what have you been into recently?
Recently I've actually read something that might be in your camp a little bit, in terms of something that I feel that might interest you. I mean, you know that I love my alternate history. It's one of the reasons that I'm drawn so strongly to the Elseworlds, as we were espousing before.
What, the Marvel and DC Elseworlds?
Yeah, those sort of stories where they take a pretty established history and they change a key aspect of it, then they play the story out again, but with the new divergence.
Sorry to interrupt you there, but I read recently that Marvel and DC are going to be republishing the Amalgam Age of Comics.
Oh, I'm looking forward to it.
Kind of, providing that they don't make them scalp bait, which is really upsetting, and release these collector's editions in limited quantities on purpose. I will probably try to buy one of the first volumes we talked about before.
Yeah, I loved it. Yeah, it's cheesy in places, but fuck it, if it's an integral part of my childhood, and it's one of the few times DC and Marvel have truly worked together.
Yes. I remember a Superman Captain America combo, a Rogue 4 combo.
I know, it was Superman Hulk and Captain America Batman.
No,
you're talking about the merging. I'm thinking about the fights. Sorry, my mistake.
Yeah.
They had the fights first, and then the universes merged.
Yeah. I always remember with the fights, there was an advertisement for Superman versus Spider-Man, and I always thought that was a bit of an unfair.
No, it was Superboy versus Spider-Man.
I remember specifically on advertisements on the back of comic books, maybe from the 80s,
who would win?
The 70s. No, and it was actually a crossover, and it was Spider-Man versus Superman for some strange reason.
Yeah, well, that lasts about 20 seconds.
I think any crossover would last 20 seconds unless it was the Hulk or Thor or a god of some kind.
I mean, I will say one thing that came out of that is the fact that they had Lobo versus Wolverine, and I might love Wolverine, but there is no fucking way that Wolverine's beating Lobo. But nonetheless, getting back to the original point, I've got a thing about alternate histories. I like reading stories about them. I mean, I really enjoyed Man in the High Castle. It's a strange.
Have you read the book?
Yes.
I haven't read the book for a few years. I've read the book, but it was a few years ago. And I found it quite dry, actually. And I liked the build-up, but it didn't really go anywhere for me.
It's a book with good concept, but not much payoff.
Yeah, I found Dick's writing really dry in it. Really, really dry, and it didn't do anything for me. I probably need to read it again, truth be told.
Well, I found an interesting... It's a story, but it's not a conventional story. It's one that was actually... a couple of users published it on... forums of a website called Alternate History, and it's an alternate history relating to Nintendo. It's a story going back to the early 90s, at the time when PlayStation, or Sony specifically, approached them with the intention of starting a CD console. You're probably well aware of this and well versed in this.
I want to say we did actually bring this up on a recent episode for some reason, but anyway, yes, the birth of the PlayStation. Yes.
Yeah, this was well, Player 2 Start is the name of this story. It's actually posted on a number of forums, and I've been reading my way through it, and it's all about what if Nintendo had chosen to go for the Nintendo CD and actually have a competing console against the Mega CD. And it's a story that's told through fictional interviews.
Is this like banking on the fact that the Mega CD would have been a success? Because it really wasn't.
It's banking on the Mega CD still being the same and still being sold, but now having a competitor.
Because the thing is, I don't know if you know about this, and I don't know if this is brought up in these, fictional interviews, but like there was a massive mismanagement of marketing within Sega around the Mega CD, and that's one of the reasons why the console was a massive commercial failure. I'm just saying that if Nintendo did release a CD-based console with Sony, chances are, and Nintendo put the SNES on the back burner, and Sony put money into budgeting the marketing, they would have trounced the Mega CD completely. Because
this actually goes into more detail about what they specifically would have done, their marketing campaigns and everything.
Because I don't know if you know this, just point this out to you, is that in Japan, Sega were developing the Sega Saturn, and then the Mega CD and the 32X were released as stopgaps to combat the rise of the CDI and the 3DO. And there was a massive marketing miscommunication between Sega of Japan and Sega of America, and basically the promotion in both companies was telling people to either. People, when asked, I can't remember the name of the guy, said, shall I buy the Mega CD and the 32X, or shall I just wait for the Saturn? And even though this product is being released on market, the person turned around and said, no, just wait for the Saturn. Yeah. Imagine
very cool. that. You just shot themselves in the foot there.
Yeah, completely. I believe, and then Sega of Japan were completely crazy. What? Why did you say that for? What did you say that for? But then at the same time, they were flooding the market with all of these half-assed, additions to the Mega Drive, and I can remember there being letters sent to Sega magazines asking about the 32X, and saying, should I buy the 32X? Should I buy the Mega CD? Should I wait for the Saturn? And then in the magazines they were just saying, oh, just buy them all, obviously, because that's what they were paid to do, And the unofficial magazines were saying, we don't know, because everyone keeps telling us something different. So anyway, sorry, a little bit of trivia there for you.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So It's weird. It's a weird world to think of, really. If Nintendo did decide to go all the way with Sony,
well, they'd had their shit together more than that. So
yeah, if anything, the branding on Nintendo has always been a bit clearer. Wii U excluded, than Sega. So, but anyway, so what was this?
Story kind of plays out with talking, for instance, about the launch titles for the Nintendo CD. And it would have been a separate add-on that gets added on to the SNES, but also there would have been another version of it you could buy that's a complete unit called the Nintendo PlayStation.
Probably, yeah. If that was to happen, that would have been
the likely
developed by Sony themselves, wouldn't it? And
then
released
and he was even talking about the fact that Sony and Nintendo both have different values in their computer games. Nintendo skews away from the likes of the more mature titles more often than not, and while Sony leans into it. And it was talking about the contractual things that had to take place for them to become to an agreement on things like that. They're all told through interviews of different people that are at the interviews, all real people, but fictional interviews. And it even talks about the launch titles being the likes of, for the Nintendo CD, being Street Fighter 2 Champion Edition and Dragon's Lair, because they could finally get the FMV footage correct on a console.
That's right. I don't know if you know, but there was actually a Dragon's Lair game released for the Super Nintendo and the 16-bit consoles, and they were all 2D sprite-based platform games rather than the
true arcade, the one that we used to see down the arcades and be like, oh my God, that looks so great. And then you realise it's not that great, it's just cute.
No. Yeah.
They even talk about how Street Fighter on the Nintendo trounces other consoles because it's got far more sound bites in it, it's got better frame rates and things like that. they have interviews with people that aren't even related to the game industry, kind of as if they're kind of taking an expose across pop culture. Like they have an interview with Leonardo DiCaprio back in the early 90s when he was still like a teenager. Talking about, I'm getting the Nintendo this Christmas. Yeah, I'm going to be playing it all the time. Stuff like that kind of fleshes out a story, the fringe stuff, and it's a really interesting. I don't know how much this is based on conjecture and truth. It is just a case of an interesting alternate history, and I do have a particular fascination in that sort of thing.
It's interesting to think about really what would have happened. This is interesting. I mean. Would it have just been like the Mega CD, a slightly more powerful version of the SNES, but with CD capabilities? That's what you'll never know, really, because obviously the PlayStation was far more powerful than the Super Nintendo in the end. So
they even talk about, is it Shigeru Miyamoto?
Correct.
They talk about how there's a delay in the release of Mario Kart. Because he's the kind of man that doesn't release a Mario game until it's correct.
You mean Mario Kart? Well, Mario Kart for the CD? You mean?
Yeah, because he's now got so much more to work with. The game gets delayed, and in terms of he actually needs to release a version of it that can be 4-player because it's now got the processing power to handle it.
Yeah.
Things like that, and it's stuff that sounds actually kind of on point for the characters they're talking about, or can I say characters for the people they're talking about.
I wonder if they would have released a new version of Mario Paint for it. I wouldn't be surprised with a CD quality sound maker. You've seen the Mario Paint sound maker, haven't you?
Yeah,
there's loads of videos. Right. Anything else interesting?
No, that's pretty much one of the things. My main focuses for the week.
What? Anything else about it? I mean,
it's, as I say, it just progresses further and further. It's kind of progressively told from the point of view of different, sometimes interviews, sometimes excerpts from magazines. So it's got Game Informer and Nintendo official magazine and stuff like that. Promote stuff that's more skewed to be propaganda, and you can tell that when you're reading that it's their own promotion of the console. Whilst you've got more critical reviews, they've even got game reviews for some games that wouldn't have come out otherwise, like little mini ones. But it even talks of likes of Final Fantasy because it's leading up to that at the end of the day. And I'm not going to go too much into it because I do think this is a story that I think you might be intrigued to check out at some point.
We did talk about it a little bit with the Final Fantasy episode, I remember now, because originally it was Final Fantasy was supposed to come out on the SNES. I think the SNES CD was what got Square interested, and then when
even talking about Nintendo were in talks with Philips at one point, and this got a kickback from them breaking talks with Philips to sign with Sony, and they get taken to court over it for bad faith negotiations. I think this is written by multiple users, but they've considered a lot of different angles on it. It isn't more than they would have made a computer game and it would have had these games on it. They've actually kind of fought out the processes and the progression of it and the effect on pop culture and things like that.
It definitely would have led to a very different world, that's for sure. A very different entertainment and cultural world anyway.
Yeah, there would have been a ripple effect down the generations of consoles for a start. So
makes you wonder, really, doesn't it? It's interesting.
Makes you wonder if it would have made Sega buck their ideas up a little bit and come with something on an equivalent level to compete, or equivalent.
Well,
level.
Like I said, when Sega had released with the release of the Mega CD, the 32-bit Saturn system was already in development, and it was the proposed power of the other consoles. I believe the PlayStation. Don't quote me on that. That led to Sega haphazardly putting 3D chips into the Saturn because it was originally supposed to be primarily supposed to be a 2D console. And that's one of the reasons why 3D was not so good on it, why the PlayStation had better looking 3D games. And I guess if there was no PlayStation, the Saturn would have continued as a primarily 2D sprite-based machine. And that would have changed the fate of the console dramatically. I imagine, who knows? It's quite interesting to think about, really.
As I say, it's easy to get lost in what-ifs. And it's that whole concept of for want of a nail, a kingdom is lost. But I find these stories very interesting, especially when they're well thought out and you can see someone's actually lined the dominoes up and gone, no, this would have happened, then this would likely have been the next most likely thing to happen, and how the chips fall. So it's an interesting story.
Yeah, I might have to look into it. Was it on Reddit, did you say?
No, it's on a website called alternatehistory.com.
Oh, right, okay, cool.
It's not a forum post, but it's just called Player 2 Start.
We'll Google it, and I will save it, and I'll have a look. Well, I've actually been playing a video game recently. The CD Timeline found it, alternatehistory.com. I've actually been playing a video game recently that I actually think you should check out.
Oh.
It's a game called Carrion. Have you ever heard of it?
No.
It's a horror-themed puzzle game with Metroidvania elements, developed by Phobia Game Studios and published by Devolver Digital in 2020 on Windows, Nintendo Switch, Xbox One, PS4, and PS5. So to give you the elevator pitch, it's like, imagine The Thing, but you're playing as The Thing, escaping from a laboratory.
Oh, so you can change your shape and you can emulate people.
You're a monster. Let's put it right. Basically, you. I don't want to spoil it because the powers do sort of go that way eventually. So basically, you're a monster. It's like a giant thing. To be honest with you, pus squid monster kind of thing. It's like The Thing, I suppose, in its more monstrous, natural state. And you escape from a laboratory, and it's a stealth game. And it's 2D sprite based, and you control movement with the left stick, and with the right stick you sort of control the limbs and even some other abilities that do powers and stuff, and which you unlock as the game goes. And basically, the game sort of puts puzzles in front of you, and you have to thoughtfully use your powers and abilities to get through them. And you can choose to be stealthy or not stealthy. Almost every single situation has multiple possibilities, and it's very good. It's very, very good and very fun. You can eat the humans if you wish and swing them about the rooms and smash their heads into the ceiling and on the floors and all kinds of crazy stuff. I kind of always did it a bit more than I should have done. But it's got a really smart puzzle element to it, as it gives you set powers, then gives you like I said, these situations you need to bypass stealthily or not, and asks you to sort of think inside or outside the box to get through it, to get to the ending. And honestly, man, I reckon you'd like it. It's only 5 hours long, short as well.
Okay.
Very, 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 very short game. So I think I'd like you to put it on your wish list on Steam. If you see it for a $5, grab it, mate, because I think you'd really like it. It's very cool.
It's not the kind of quirk I like in a game. So.
Yeah, it's very cool. I do like a Metroidvania style game, and truth be told, I would not. I say Metroidvania because you have an overworld, and you unlock abilities, and these abilities allow you to get further into the overworld, or you can go back and find more stat boosting abilities with doors you can unlock. So in terms of its of exploration and narrative progression, it is like a Metroidvania, but the gameplay itself is like a puzzle stealth game, if you so wish it to be. So I mean, you've already said possessing people and pretending to be people. That is kind of a spoiler saying that you can do that, but if you watch any trailer, it's in the trailers. It's very cool. It's very, very cool, and it definitely places some pins for you at certain points in the game and lets you knock them over in really interesting ways. So, Carrion, man. Definitely add that on your wish list and give that a go at some point. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it.
Absolutely, man.
You're always looking for a cheap game. And games like this these days are short. They're designed to be completed within a week if you play like me, or a couple of weeks if you want to jump in and jump out.
I mean, considering we were talking about Final Fantasy not too long ago, with regards to games, you don't really get many games on that sort of longevity anymore.
You do, mate. You do. It's in the indie space.
Yeah.
There's lots of really interesting games in the indie space. The problem is with AAA, let's call it, as they call it in the industry, is that video games have become so expensive to make that they make them humongous to get maximum playtime out of them, but also have room for DLC as well.
Or they're leaning more towards a multiplayer element in them in some cases.
Sometimes, yeah, sometimes. The last few Assassin's Creed games have been humongous affairs, whereas before they were just 20-hour games. But in the indies, After you.
I was going to say that. I mean, I not that I checked out the franchise because that would imply that I found something wrong with the franchise. But the last time I played Assassin's Creed was back in the days of Ezio. I didn't play anything from about 3 onwards. So.
I haven't gone through 1.
Yeah.
To this day, I think they're overrated. I think everything they do, Arkham does better. That's always been my problem with those games. They are just
absolutely yes.
Yeah, I liked Assassin's Creed 2's setup. I like it. Was it Ezio in that game, or was it in the first game?
No, Ezio is Altair for the first one, and Ezio was the free second game. Like there was a trilogy for the second game.
He was likable. I really liked him. He was cool, and it kind of made me want to play the game. But the combat was so rubbish and so uninteresting, and there was just nothing to it. I like the idea of helping Leonardo build his stuff, and that was in it. Wasn't it Leonardo da Vinci? Wasn't it?
Yeah.
But the game's overrated trash in my opinion. But later on, they sort of turn into gigantic open world affairs, and I at the moment am playing Xenoblade 3, and these games are like 50 hours minimum. And while I do like to play a big RPG every now and then, like in between, I always have a palate cleanser of like a small indie game that's like 5 hours long. That's just or several of them, to be honest with you. So yeah, anyway, so this episode is dedicated to Dune, specifically the movie adaptations that have come out. Obviously, this podcast, dated now, is we're recording this literally a week before the release of Denis Villeneuve's Dune Part 2. So in the next segment, we're going to just briefly talk about the story in the book. I mean, briefly, because that's a complex story, and sort of chat about our thoughts and feelings and experiences around that book, and then we're going to talk about the first 2 film adaptations. So we'll be right back. Welcome back to the podcast. So, Mark.
Yep.
Dune. Dune is a film and a book, let's say.
And an influence, and
yes,
a number of other things as well.
Yes. Well, with this episode, as I say, there's a slight caveat, unfortunately. I planned on reading the book for the 3rd time, just to sort of refresh my memory, take some notes and whatnot. And then I got ill with what I think is COVID. Reading while ill, it's not good.
It doesn't stick, does it, man?
No, it doesn't. And I would like to say that I think Herbert's writing is very loose at the worst of times and doesn't sink in without concentration as well. So while I know the story quite well and I reread it and whatnot, I'm going to go through the plot and we'll talk about the themes of the book before we move on to the movies. But if there are any holes, and also this is not a Dune podcast, obviously, there are some fantastic Dune podcasts out there that will go much deeper into the universe and the world that we're going to go into, because
we're skimming this, aren't we?
We are, in comparison to the breadth world building that is in this book. We'll talk about that once I've just gone through the story for those listeners who maybe don't know it so well, or maybe some listeners are listening because they want a refresher on the story before they see the film or whatnot. We'll see. So anyway, Dune, the epic science fiction novel by American author Frank Herbert, was originally published in 2 waves between 1963 and 64 in Analog magazine as Dune World and Prophet of Dune. Probably the most important science fiction novel ever released, I would say. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, based on my personal research into this prior to the pod, I am now understanding the amount of influence that this story has had.
There were other science fiction authors before him that were important. I mean, obviously Asimov's Foundation is massively influential. E. Doc Smith's Lensman is also quite important to the space opera genre, but like no, neither. I mean, obviously Asimov is popular, but I don't think like the Foundation series, like.
So, would you say that Dune is to science fiction what Lord of the Rings was to fantasy?
100%. Not just in terms of its influence, but in terms of. We'll talk about that in a minute. We'll talk about that in a sec. But yes, 100%. In terms of like the world building, because that's what the Lord of the Rings is. It's not just a fantasy story. It's a fantasy story in a world that Tolkien created that is there for us to unravel, and that is exactly what Herbert was doing with not just Arrakis, but the wider, space opera universe. Even though it's not a space opera novel, a space opera universe that is beyond the story. But anyway, so the book was tied with Roger Zelazny's This Immortal for the Hugo Best Novel, and it also won the Nebula Best Novel. So we've got the double. Have you ever read Roger Zelazny? By the way,
Nope.
Have you ever heard of him?
Nope.
So I did read one of his books earlier in the last year. I believe I talked about it on the podcast. I wasn't really into it, but I'm actually really interested in reading his Chronicles of Amber fantasy series. A lot of people really talked that up. So one day. But so one thing that sets Herbert's world apart from other science fiction, specifically what came before him, as I was just saying, E.E. Doc Smith's Lensman, Foundation, is that it moves away from hard science fiction space opera and the utopian feel, and it creates its own fascinating world, doing away with many of the tropes of these genres. And that sort of gives it its own character, doesn't it? Its own feel and its own tone. So,
where the science doesn't actually dictate it in any fashion. If anything, it does try to get away from the science.
It does, yeah. It does. It's weird, like, you call it the most important science fiction novel,
and yet there's hardly any science fiction in it. So.
Well, yeah, exactly. It's weird, isn't it? Like, I think like its interest in ecology is what makes it science fictional more than anything else. But like, a lot of the more far out technology is through mysticism and through drugs. So it's almost like science fiction fantasy, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
In a way. Even though, to be honest with you, dude, like, a lot of science fiction was originally known as fantasy before it became like hard science fiction, which is interesting. But anyway, it's going to do a rundown of the plot. I assume that you have refreshed your memory as well, but hopefully this will refresh your memory even further, because I did spend some time working this out. So, the story of Dune is set in a distant future, feudal, space-wide society where various noble houses control, I quote, planetary property. In the universe, long after artificial intelligence was outlawed because of artificial intelligence being bad, there was, a universe-wide jihad against AI and because of how bad it was. The most important substance in the universe is the spice melange, only harvestable on the desert planets of Arrakis. The origins of the spice and how it is used throughout the lore is one of the most fascinating aspects of the Dune universe. But for the sake of this podcast, I'm just going to say now, it's because of those handworms. The weird thing about talking about this book specifically is that, like, I've read further into the universe. I've read the next two books, but I've not read the second of the Herbert trilogy. Seen the films, obviously, chatted online about it, talked to people about it, read about it. Like, my knowledge of the lore and the universe as it is, you forget what he reveals and what he doesn't reveal in the first book. So you're going to have to sort of bear with my knowledge, because I'm not really talking. Well, I'm going to talk about the plot of this first book. I may step into the other books by accident.
That's fair, man. To be honest, my knowledge is even thinner than yours when it comes to this. I'm purely just first story on when it comes to Dune.
Yeah. So anyway. Up until the narrative begins, Arrakis, the planet Dune, where the spice melange is harvested, was the planet Arrakis was under the control of the Harkonnens, the villainous house of the book. Duke Leto Atreides of House Atreides, it should be pronounced Atreides because it's based on the Greek word, is given control of Arrakis by the Paddish Emperor Shaddam IV. It's interesting, Mark. Do you know who's playing Emperor Shaddam in the new film?
Refresh my memory.
You don't know because it's only been released recently in a trailer.
Oh, and I thought it was in the first movie.
I was wondering. No. We'll talk about this later. So anyway, Leto obviously has to accept this, and he suspects treachery, and he is indeed right to, and he is right. But what is important is why the Padish Emperor Shaddam IV is looking to stab Leto in the back. It's because he's a well-liked and popular monarch, duke, let's say, and Shaddam sees him as a potential threat in the future. And Shaddam conspires with the House Harkonnen to destroy Leto's family. Unfortunately, Leto is compelled to obey and actually seeks a potential way out of this net/trap by utilizing what he calls desert power and the indigenous people of Arrakis, the Fremen. Furthermore, Leto's concubine, Lady Jessica, is an acolyte of the Bene Gesserit, an all-female political group who wield mystical powers and abilities. For my money, this is where the borderline fantasy elements sort of lift the hard science fiction realism into soft science fiction borderline fantasy. Anyway, so some of this stuff is like hinted at in the book, but it is actually explicitly stated in the appendices of the first book, and that is that the Bene Gesserit use their manipulative abilities to spread religion through lesser planets, including Arrakis, proposing the coming of the Kwisatz Haderach, depending on the language, the One, let's say. Did you know this?
I knew of this. I mean, in terms of research that I've done more recently.
Yeah. So through a careful breeding program, they plan to birth the Kwisatz Haderach and control this being, put them on the throne, so to speak, in the long run. And a part of this plan is Lady Jessica, who is Leto, which we need to say concubine, is told to bear a baby daughter. The Bene Gesserits can control the very molecules of their body, including the sex of their children. Regardless, Jessica gives birth to a son because of Leto's wish for an heir and because of her love of him. This is kind of, obviously, apart from the fact that she births like the main character of this story, I think this is kind of an important aspect of the overall narrative as well because of her reasoning, which we'll get into when we start talking about the characters. Anyway, the son, Paul, from a young age, is trained in political intrigue, warfare, and self-defense. Also, he has been taught many of the Bene Gesserit ways, including the power of the voice. He has also, prophetic dreams about Arrakis and a strange Fremen woman. Paul is also tested by a Reverend Mother, a high-ranking position in the Bene Gesserit. Let's say, legions. So when House Atreides takes over Arrakis, the Harkonnens and the Emperor's elite troops, the Sardaukar, attack Jessica, and Paul are the only survivors. They seek shelter with the Fremen, and this is where they sort of teach the Fremen the weirding way, which is the Bene Gesserit fighting technique. And Paul takes the name of Muad'Dib after winning a ritualistic knife fight. Jessica becomes a Reverend Mother by drinking the water of life, and it's kind of selfish and naughty of her doing this because she's pregnant at the time with her unborn who will become known as Alia, which essentially turns her into like another like super being. Paul also at this point takes a Fremen lover in Shani, the woman from his visions, and has a son, Leto II. 2 years pass. This is I hate the fact that he does this in the book. Well, 2 years pass. The time skip, hate it. Fucking hate it. 2 years pass, and Paul becomes the Fremen's prophesied messiah, as planted by the Bene Gesserit's Missionaria Protectiva. Paul seeks revenge for the original plot against his family, but also has visions of a holy war waged by the Fremen, which could kill billions and consume the entire universe. This conflict is kind of at the center of Paul's character, and is quite interesting. Herbert's commentary on like leadership and religion and followers and whatnot is kind of like one of the core tenets of the narrative. So after being reunited with Gurney Halleck being like his Paul's father's right-hand man, let's say, and Paul's primary weapons trainer, Gurney actually attempts to kill Jessica because he believed that Jessica was the traitor. Paul does not foresee this happening, and after dealing with the situation, realizes that he needs to become even more powerful, and so he drinks the water of life. The water of life is what the Bene Gesserits drink to become a reverend mother. The water of life is like this. It's the because the sandworms are allergic to water, and so the water of life is like the water that a drowned sandworm dies in, and it's poisonous, and no man is to drink it because no man has ever survived drinking it. After falling unconscious for 3 weeks, he awakens, and he is officially the Kwisatz Haderach with the prophesized incredible powers such as clairvoyant perception and complete and total control of the Bene Gesserit abilities. Again, like some of the main thematic concerns of this novel are like fate, inevitability, and free will, isn't it? But also sort of wrapped around the monomyth. You know, the Joseph Campbell Hero of 1,000 Faces concept of the
ascension of the one.
Yeah. So Paul senses that the Emperor and the Baron Harkonnen are to make a play in order to quell the Fremen rebellion on Arrakis. During like a raid, Paul's son, Leto II, is killed. His sister, Alia, is captured and taken to the Emperor, which I always thought was a bit convenient, to be honest with you, how it plays out. Under the cover of a convenient electrical storm, Paul leads the Fremen on a massive attack on Arrakeen, because it's currently run by the Harkonnens, riding sandworms. Riding a sandworm is kind of like a ritual for the Fremen, so, you know, one of the most, like, an important moment of the novel is him learning to do this. Anyway, so, you know, sandworms, Fremen, Paul, they attack. His sister Alia assassinates the Baron and escapes, and then, as what is importantly stated multiple times, Paul's play for power is to threaten to destroy the spice. Now, the spice melange is what enables space travel in light of artificial intelligence being outlawed. If I remember correctly, it's only because spice gives you like a clairvoyance, doesn't it? And therefore,
it gives you a perception beyond yourself.
That yes,
you to pilot the ships.
Pilot the ships, that's right. Because until then, only AIs could pilot the ship, like through wormholes, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, but they could do the calculations while humans could feel it, sort of thing.
Yeah, yes.
Or use of the spice. Anyway.
Well, they perceive where they're going to be, and then like, you know. So
physical thing. So
yeah, you sort of have to take it for what it is. Yeah. Anyway, I say Paul threatens to destroy the spice because he can destroy it. That means he owns it, which is another like important like motif in the novel. This is where Fade Arufa attempts to stop Paul. Fade Arufa is like built up as this warrior, Harkonnen warrior, also like weirdly. The Baron Harkonnen has like a weird sexual like obsession with him in the film, especially. And anyway, so yes, Fade Arufa challenges Paul to a ritualistic knife fight and loses. Paul becomes Emperor, but the ending is bittersweet because Paul accepts that whether or not in this moment, especially during the fight, whether he lives or dies, he's gone too far into the religion. Let's say he's utilized his position as prophet, as the one, as the Kwisatz Haderach, as Muad'Dib. He's utilized it to the point where the Fremen, will view him as a martyr even if he dies, and the jihad, as it is said in the book, the holy war that the jihad will wage across the universe will happen no matter what. So that's the basic plot. Anything I missed there, Mark?
No, not to my mind. I think you more or less covered it.
I skipped most of the world building and the layers upon layers upon layers of subterfuge. So yeah, in sort of chatting about this book, I just wanted to ask you, Mark, what are the circumstances surrounding you reading it originally? And how long ago was it?
It was a long time ago, man.
Mm-hmm. Can you say how old you were?
I think I was about 15. Which, if I'm truly honest, based on what I can remember of the story, because I've read recaps of it, I did not intend to read this story again because I think at the time when I read it, a lot of it went over my head. I'd read sort of like other stuff at the time. I was kind of getting into Pratchett. I enjoyed a lot more light stuff, and then suddenly this book comes along, and some of my friends had read it, and they said, "Oh, it's an important book. Like you should read it." So I did. And there were elements that stuck out to me. I thought it was an interesting story, but it was a fucking slog.
Yes.
Especially for me at that age. I mean, I was even more impatient, but I persevered because, fuck it, it's Dune. Everyone was talking about it in some capacity or another. And I got to the end and I was like, oh, that's an interesting book. But I felt no compunction to continue reading the series or anything like that. I just kind of put it under my belt and went like, yep, read Dune now. Now I can move on. and this is the thing to like. I know people that will kind of espouse about the fact that this book is reverent. It is kind of held up on a pedestal, but it's never had that impression with me. I've never seen it on that sort of capacity. I mean, I think it's a good story. I watch the movies, and they're good stories. I enjoy them. But that's not to say that it isn't a movie. It isn't a story that isn't worth analysis. It has got interesting concepts that, to be honest, I haven't seen in other stories.
Yes, especially when you think about when it was made.
Yeah, it was a very forward-thinking story.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's one thing I didn't appreciate at the time when I was reading it, because I was reading it into the capacity of it's a book I got from my school library. I didn't take into account the fact that this is written far earlier than a lot of other stories that have retread their ground since. Maybe I would have appreciated it a little more at the time.
Yeah, let's be honest. Unless you've got someone who like explains it to you in such a way that your 15-year-old mind can comprehend, because you're not going to appreciate it. I didn't read it till like years later. When you were reading this, I was reading Lord of the Rings, and as I've said before, a lot of the books that I've read in my formative years were because of my father, and he did tell me to read it a lot. I can remember it like it was the three books he always banged on at me about were. Oh no! Because I already read Lord of the Rings. So the three science fiction authors that he banged on at me about were Frank Herbert with Dune, obviously. He always banged on at me about Robert Heinlein with obviously Starship Troopers, and Philip K. Dick as well. Always banged on at me about Philip K. Dick.
Combination of authors there.
Yeah, definitely. Who I would probably say that, because they are the formative science fiction authors. Heinlein is pre-Herbert as well, and I'm due rereading some of Heinlein's most important stuff. I've read like the main three: Starship Troopers, The Moon is a Harsh Mistress, and what's the one about Space Jesus? I can't remember.
Strange Land or something.
That's the one. Yeah, that's the one. Martian Jesus. Yes. Yeah, I've read those three, but it's a long time ago. And I might have read a couple more as well. But yeah, and he bought me a copy of Dune, which is the one I still have to this day. I want to say for my 18th birthday, maybe 21st birthday. Oh, I'm not too sure. A birthday he bought it for. I tried reading it as you did yourself. And I was used to reading books with like lots and lots of concepts. I read Lord of the Rings.
They invite you in with sort of like ideas and like.
Let's not beat around the bush here. Tolkien is a far superior writer to Herbert. It's just get it out there now. No matter how you look at it. No matter how you look at it. He just is.
Even if he does like breaking into song every couple of pages.
Yeah. Well, Herbert does something worse than that, in my opinion, in Dune. And I'll tell you what that is in a second. But it took me a long time to read this book. I don't know what it was. Maybe I read more fantasy when my father bought it for me, and I was not as into science fiction. So what actually made me finally read it, ironically, was it was a girl I was dating whose favourite director was David Lynch, and obviously I knew about the Dune film. Pretty sure I saw the Dune film as a kid. Would you reckon you saw it as a kid?
Yeah, at least once or twice.
Yeah, we'll talk about that.
Totally lost on me then as well at that age, but I appreciate
it was lost on everyone. We'll talk about that in the next section anyway. And so I read the book with the intent of watching the film, basically. And it's what makes a good book, in my opinion, Mark, especially, is books that leave an imprint on you. And there are certain moments in that book that I can remember exactly where I was when I read it. Exactly where I was when I read it. Like, for example, when Paul drinks the water of life, I was in a train station in London. And like, that was a brilliant piece. So anyway, I read it then. And then I was kind of like, for me, it was a 4-star book, but I recognized its importance. And then I read it again before the first. So I want to say I first read it when I was late 20s. Then I read it again before the Denis Villeneuve film came out. And then I read it again for this podcast. And one thing I can say, mate, actually, is that the more I've read it, the more I like it.
I see, because you can see the rhythm of the story now, and you know what point
I'm just taking more of it in.
Yeah,
really, that's what it is. Every time, with the amount of times I've watched the films, read other books in the series, and then reread this book, I've sort of taken more and more of it in, and I've been able to appreciate its strengths more and more and more, and that is its world building. So I just want to get this out of the way. For me, Dune is like the perfect representation of the concept of a flawed masterpiece. Like, it is a masterpiece, bar none. It is like a 5 out of 5, 10 out of 10 novel, but fuck me, is it flawed as well? You know, it has like some of the best world building in the history of science fiction, bar none. Like, especially for the year it was written. You know, whatever like super deep, super complex world building you have today in science fiction, all of it owes it to, you know, to Herbert. You know, like Heinlein, Dick, you know, Asimov, they have world building, but not to this level. I mean, you know, Asimov utilized his own experience and his own knowledge into the concept of the Foundation, which was the prediction of the future through mathematics. You know, that was, you know, but the level of depth in the ecology, you know, the layers upon layers upon layers upon layers of intrigue, of subterfuge, because it's a feudal society, the multiple houses, the cultures, you know, it's just so much. It is an impressive piece of work, and I would say to anyone, this is not a book you can skim, ever. And that is again, like, I think, unless you are the sort of person that's ready to go into this book knowing that it is an undertaking, that it requires your time, the more you put into it, the better it is. You know,
because you lift more from the story at that point.
Yes, exactly. If you're prepared to do that, then yeah, you will get the most out of this book. If you're not, I think, you know, you will struggle with it. You know, there are appendices in the back, just like in Lord of the Rings, and an A to Z, you know, of terms. Yeah. The second time I read it, I actually said to myself, I'm going to take my time with this book. I'm going to reference every single word I don't know with the appendices. I'm going to do it properly this time, you know. And, you know, I enjoyed it so much that second time that I went and read the next two. So it worked. But this all comes with some caveats. So I want to ask you something, Mark, because we've talked about the use of inner monologues in prose fiction in the past.
Yeah.
Do you remember the inner monologues in this story?
Faintly, yeah.
I fucking hate them.
They are rather extensive, aren't they?
It's not. There's a lot of them, and they are extensive. I mean, we said before about like characters having their thoughts like bleed into the page through free indirect speech, which is not often like how Herbert's done it. In this case, Herbert's doing it as italics. As I mentioned, Jordan did it with The Wheel of Time. I like this style personally in my own work, but the biggest problem with this, the way he uses these monologues, is that he breaks the show don't tell rule over and over and over again. It is so annoying. I actually made a list of examples of when he does this. Often what will happen is Paul will go to do something, and then someone looking on will narrate what you, the reader, would usually just infer automatically. And it makes the book overwritten. It makes it... repetition in all prose fiction is tiring, is it not?
Yeah.
And it makes you feel patronized. Because it makes you feel like the author thinks something is so important he has to say it twice for you to pay attention. And this has led to a lot of issues with me regarding this book over the years. Like, in a lot of podcasts I've listened to recently, over the years, and people I've spoken to over the years, they say, "Oh, I read this book when I was 15, and I really connected with Paul's story," And I've always thought I never connected with Paul's story ever, because I felt like Herbert was banging my head over and over again with the book, telling me, like this character, he's fantastic. Just it breaks every fucking rule. For example, a lot of pre-modernist authors would write expecting you to infer characters' emotions, to infer their feelings. They wouldn't necessarily...
with their actions rather than going, I felt angry. They'd actually
the actual act of using free indirect speech, stream of consciousness techniques is actually a very modern thing. It's actually more in line with the Romantic era, where emotions became much more pronounced. There's the philosopher Rousseau, who wrote The Confessions, and it's a really important novel. I'm showing my degree here in the romantic genre, because of how naked he presented himself on the page. He went so in depth and so introspective on himself that people found it almost horrifying to read. But you shouldn't do that at the expense of readability. It's just, I've always found it really frustrating. And there's been quite a few times when I read it the third time round and a character said something about what's happening that is obvious, and I've just gone, oh my god, no, not again. It's just literally banging my head against the wall, like, stop it. I know I'm not stupid. You don't, when Paul's trying to use the voice, you don't need Jessica to tell you that he's trying to use the voice. As well,
demonstrated by the fact that he's trying. So.
Yeah, and it's so annoying. And the fact that Jessica is like sort of like cheering him on as well in her head, and I'm like, that's my job as the reader. I'm supposed to feel that. You're not supposed to tell me to feel that. You're supposed to write this evocatively so that I can feel this connection to this character myself. Your words are supposed to make me feel this. You don't tell me to feel this, Herbert. I'm sorry. It's really frustrating. And to this day, like, it still irks the fucking hell out of me. And I really struggle with connecting with Paul as a character. It's a testament to the films that I like him, if I'm honest. Because, like, maybe it's because I wasn't the right age as well. As I said, like, a lot of people who said they love Paul as a character were 15 when they read it. So...
yeah, well, I didn't relate to Paul in any way, shape, or form when I read the story.
Can you say why? Can you? Or that's going to be hard. Okay,
I can.
I was going to say, going on what you know about yourself now, mm-hmm. Can you like project your consciousness back in time and think, why would you have not connected with this character?
Paul didn't feel like he had much depth to me. I don't know. Yes, he is like Destiny in the whole story. It's kind of like
Destiny does not give characters a kind of depth, though.
It's like turning around and saying that you relate to Neo. It's like when he It's like no. I mean, Neo doesn't have any depth in the Matrix. I mean, certainly he does stuff. He has desires, but he
Trinity.
Yeah,
that's it. No, there's nothing to him. There's nothing to him.
It literally is. You're told from the start this guy's going to be the one, and it's like, okay, and then
just like Dune.
And it's just like, and it bangs into, and it's just saying with like Dune, where it bangs your head about he's the good guy. He's look what he's capable of. Look what he's going to be capable of. And after a while, you kind of like stop telling me and just have him do it, and maybe have him do it in a flawed fashion so I can relate to this character a little better.
That's the thing. That's the thing. His character flaws come out with the gradual acceptance of his destiny, as I was saying earlier on, because he starts seeing visions of the Fremen waging that giant war and like killing billions of people, and that's when like the internal conflict starts to happen with the character. When I start to find him interesting,
but the fact is, oh god, I did my job too well. So he's kind of regret about the fact that he's been so successful in getting these people together and sending them off on this massive crusade.
Well, I was just going to say, no, I'm going to talk about. We'll talk about this in a minute. So another thing about the novel as well is, I don't know, I'm up and down about it. I don't know if you remember, but there are these like mini passages at the beginning of each chapter that are narrated by Princess Irulan, who's sort of talking about what's happening in the book, but in the future. And she's like quoting Paul's character in like philosophical passages. Do you remember them?
Nah, that's gone from my memory.
Yeah. I was always in two minds about these because, again, as I've said before, I like metatextual techniques, and this is kind of metatextual. It makes you feel like the book you're reading is a holy book, almost. But then at the same time, when you figure out that, you know, because it's not apparent straight away that she's talking about Paul, at a certain point in the book, you start to realise she's talking about Paul, and that Paul is not going to die. And he basically gives Paul plot armor with these sections.
Yeah.
And basically removes all tension from the novel, as far as I'm concerned. But at the same time, it gives it a mythical power as well. And it makes you feel like what you're reading is really important. So, I don't know. I'm 50-50 about it. I also think that Herbert could have spent a bit more time rewarding the reader's perseverance in this book, because there's a lot of world building. The first half of the book is very heavy. First quarter of the book is very heavy with exposition, and it's all characters going, oh, what do you think about this, when they already know about it. So it's like heavy-handed as well. And then but the action in general is not something that he's interested in. Like, it's common knowledge that like they attack, as we said earlier on. There's a giant worm battle at the end of the book, Mark. Right?
Yeah.
Now, in Lord of the Rings, that book is like over 1,000 pages long, and the Battle of Pelennor Fields is about 3 or 4 pages long, I think. Not a lot, really, is it? But there's all the other action as well. This book is 620 pages in my copy, and the worm battle is a paragraph. You know, it's a very good paragraph. Very good. Very, very good.
But regardless, this is the climax you've been building towards in the story.
Yeah. It's, you know.
Talk about literary blue balls. It just doesn't
yeah. But in the end, though, Herbert was more interested in the themes. He always was more interested in the big, grand themes than the action. And it's fine. You know, I get that, because there is a lot to unpack. Which is what I want to chat to you about now, actually, was, as we say, we're talking about. The book is very much about the rise of the Messiah. But something that Herbert has said is a key theme in his work is that it's like his general view on superheroes, people with that much power, let's say, not just in terms of superpower, but political power, leaders. You shouldn't trust them. People with that much power should not be trusted. And the sequel novel, Messiah, I actually like more than this book, than Dune, which might be sacrilege to some, but for me, it's more of a personal book. It's much more about Paul dealing with the ramifications of what happens in Dune, having a conscience, trying to fix things, actually going out of his way to fight his predestined, fate, let's say. Whereas, well, it's complicated because in Dune, he's using his predestination, let's say, as a way to get revenge, isn't he? As well. So he's sort of accepting his fate because he wants revenge, but at the same time, he is also accepting his fate. But there's a little parallel that I picked up recently that I really like. So one thing this book does, and the films do, is they really paint Paul's father, Leto, as this kind, compassionate character. Would you agree with that?
I guess. I mean, he seemed nicer compared to some of the other houses.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of that. It's more explained in the book that Leto is loved because of how compassionate and how honourable and how kind he is. People, even when he's portrayed by Yue, he feels terrible about it. Jessica bears Leto a son because of her love for him. She goes against
the religious
order because she cares for him so much. But that love starts from him, probably giving her the kindness, let's say, being generous enough to her. What the Emperor, the Emperor reveals that he views Leto as a threat because of how popular he is on the world stage, how compassionate he is, how he feels that people will turn to his side, let's say, and in the future he will become a threat to the throne, which is, why he screws him over. So what this book is saying is that in the grand political stage, such a person cannot survive, right? Because of
to be eaten by sharks. Yeah,
correct. But also, how does Paul get the throne? With fear.
Yeah.
He threatens the entire universe with the destruction of modern society. He gains the throne through power, which is not how the Emperor views how Leto will acquire power. And I think that's an interesting parallel, that Paul literally goes against his heritage. But it also had like a nice political viewpoint on that. Power is absolute, corrupts to a degree. Paul shows a better side to him later in a Messiah, and that a good leader can't make it.
Well, he does it because it's an act of necessity. It's the manipulation and the fear because he knows that compassion won't work because it was tried.
It doesn't even come into the picture. He just does it.
Yeah.
He sees that he has control of the spice now, and he will use it to remove, the man who killed his father, contributed to killing his father, let's say, and to remove the Harkonnens as well. So I think that actually is a quite powerful, theme. I like it. But what do you think about the concept that the Bene Gesserits are the ones that created the religion that Paul abuses for power in the first place?
That they created the religion?
Yes.
As a tool, I suppose. I mean, they always talk about it being an opiate of the masses when it comes to religion, and that's something that you utilize to control people en masse.
Yes.
And it shows how he sort of like almost wrests control to a degree from them for his.
Yes. Well, that's represented. That's represented by his use of the voice, as he says that he overpowers the Reverend Mother eventually, with the voice. Tells her to whatever. I can't remember what it is. He says exactly.
Get in line.
Something like that. Shut up, you.
Yeah, but it is all about how sort of like the religion itself isn't inherently evil, but it is the people that are utilizing it certainly have nefarious motives. Maybe they're doing it for the greater good, but it's keeping.
Well, they're not doing it for the greater good. They're doing it for their own good. I mean, it is, explicitly stated that like part of the reason why there's a Bene Gesserit concubine behind Leto and other leaders is because the concubine
steering the political stage.
Exactly. So as I said, I've not read all the books, so I can't go much further than that. But do you not think that this idea that the Bene Gesserits created the Fremen, should I say, Kwisatz Haderach religion, Do you think it undermines the power of Paul's monomythical journey at all?
I think it's meant to demonstrate the power of belief. Even if what you're believing in isn't true, it can still drive a man forwards.
Interesting. It comes into to play more so in the sequel sequel novel.
Wait, I think Pratchett touched on this a little bit with regards to gods and belief. Wherein in a lot of aspects they say that the god exists first and then the belief follows. But in Pratchett's universe, it's the other way around. The belief creates the gods. And that's the more that people that believe, the more powerful the god is.
Yes. Sounds a bit like that game Black and White as well, actually. Remember that game?
Yeah, where you had your little acolyte and you like this tiger that used to eat my villagers. Yeah. Stop it! Put him down! Yeah, love that game. But it's an interesting concept when it comes to the whole theological argument in terms of like, why would an all omnipotent being need belief and praise and worship? And in these sort of structured theories, this gives an explanation for that they do require the belief because the belief is where their power is drawn from.
It's interesting because it's through them that Paul acquires desert power. You know, the ritual of riding the worms. You know, the secret of the spice. Paul and Jessica teach the Fremen the Weirding way, which is very different in the Lynch film, but they do teach them like the Weirding way, which is the Bene Gesserit form of fighting, which makes them more potent and means they're able to fight the Sardaukar more effectively. And at the same time, they're using the teachings of the Bene Gesserits as well, so using it against them. It's interesting. One thing that I do like is that Herbert never really gives you the answers to the questions. He just gives you more questions and more paradoxes and sets up more and more arguments and more conflict, as I said, as he does with Dune Messiah. Herbert said that he liked the idea of setting up the hero and then breaking him, having this hero reach a plateau with his ideologies and then breaking those ideologies. He does this in Dune and Dune Messiah, and then he does this with Children of Dune and God Emperor as well. I found Dune Messiah shocking when I first read it because of how much he literally completely deconstructs Paul as a character, and it made me like him even more. So anything else to say about this book, Mark, for the rest of this segment?
Not so much about the book itself, but in terms of the influences that came out of it, in terms of the way in which it leached down into science fiction that followed. It's not just like science fiction. It seems to have touched all manner of different types of media. There are a lot of people out there that like these stories, and they've wanted to praise and adulate it in some fashion or another, whether it be in music, television. Hell,
yes, of course, yes.
Futurama's got references to Dune. It's, you can see once you start to, as you say, it is a sort of, in terms of that concept of a fantasy story disguised as a science fiction story, or a kind of it has heavy elements of fantasy in the science fiction. You can see that later on in the likes of Star Wars. That they took Star Wars is essentially a fantasy story masquerading as a science fiction story.
With lots of religious undertones as well.
Exactly, with the Force and you've got your knights with their swords, you've got the princess that needs to be saved. It's essentially a fantasy story. And in this capacity, this is not that same story. You're not rescuing a princess, but it does still have those undertones of the fantasy of a man uniting a nation.
It's interesting that most of the combat is hand to hand with blades as well, isn't it?
Yeah,
because
there's no blasters or
which is a law and in-law, explanation. Because of the nature of the personal shields, and that if you fired a laser rifle bolts to a shield, you would create an atomic explosion and kill everyone. So they just don't do it. So, but that gives it I think as well that it sort of links it with the feudal influences on the political stage as well.
This is a valid point. As you say, when you refer to feudal, that does bring up images of medieval political systems.
That's exactly what it is, because the political systems were based on landowners. Right? It's about the ownership of land. It's just that Dune's universe stage is based on ownership of planets and resources from planets. Hence the fact that the most sought after planet and resource is Arrakis with its spice. So it's very cool. It's very, very cool. Like I said, the story itself is fine, but I find the world way more interesting. The very concept of the sandworms and the melange and how
the sandworms were cool. They were immensely cool. The concept and the idea of these vast titanic creatures just driving their way through the desert sand was an image that it's one of the things that did stay with me. It's
iconic, very iconic. The bit where the worm eats the sandcrawler because it's attracted to it. Incredibly iconic. And when the worm first chases Paul and Jessica, I like how they're referred to. Is it they're called the Shalud or something like that, which means old man of the desert. That's the Fremen's reverence for the creatures, which is always just a fascinating image. Even when my dad told me about Dune and was talking about the sandworms and the concept of the spice, he was capturing my imagination. They're just fascinating. It's just fascinating imagery that just works on so many levels.
It's unique in that capacity as well, because I mean, the only other time I can think of seeing sandworms is Beetlejuice. And I don't know if that was a call out to Dune when they decided to make those, but
yeah, of course, maybe. Who knows? I mean, that's not a beat around the bush. Obviously, spice is obviously an analogy for oil.
It's the resource, and it's
exactly, and
I mean, a resource that comes from a desert world, and tribes that sort of revere it, but may not use it on the same level as what the outsiders want to use it for.
Yeah, and which is oddly relevant today, obviously, which is forever relevant, really, which is incredible when you think about it. And obviously, there's all the psychedelic aspects within the story. I do believe Herbert was interested in psychedelics himself, so
he was known to dabble in mushrooms. So.
Yeah, exactly. So I imagine that was a massive influence on certain aspects of the story. So, but yeah. That's just a brief rundown of this book. As I said, I'm not a scientific, and for me personally, what I love about storytelling is the human, emotional side of storytelling. And that's kind of where this book is limited for me personally, but it's world building I can, look at and go, this is an absolute milestone in literature for it, So while it's in head and heart, isn't it? That my head says to me that this is one of the most important books of the 20th century, and that it does things that were never done before. It does things that haven't really been bettered, really, to this day. I've read science fiction novels that are as good as, has as good world building, but maybe not as well executed. But my heart doesn't love it like I would say I love Hyperion, for example, which is the best science fiction novel of the 20th century, in my opinion. But, that's Dune, Mark. So,
thank you for reintroducing me.
So, we'll be back in a sec, and we'll be chatting about David Lynch's film. So,
we're going to get Sting in his pants, man. Let's do this.
Oh, dear. Be right back. Welcome back to the podcast. So in the next two sections, we're going to go over the two film adaptations, starting, first of all, with David Lynch's first attempt. Attempts to bring this film to the big screen date back as far as 1971, with names such as Ridley Scott and Alexandro Jodorowsky. Is that how you say it? Apparently, have you heard about Jodorowsky's Dune?
Yeah, I've heard of, but I don't know too much about it.
There's a documentary out there that I've not seen yet, and they were talking about it on a podcast I was listening to recently, and it sounds fascinating. It also sounds like he was looking to change a lot. And it wouldn't have been the same story, that's for sure. So definitely have to check that out at some point. Anyway, it's well known, as you probably know, Mark, that David Lynch's Dune was a bit of a disaster.
Yeah, David Lynch don't even associate with it anymore, does he?
No, he doesn't. No, it didn't make its money back at all. I myself am a massive fan of David Lynch. Massive.
Oh, you're what a Twin Peaks freak, like fanatic.
All of it, all of his films, everything. Because with Twin Peaks season 3, he literally brought his whole career together and put it all into one 18-hour movie, basically. But I'm a massive fan of Lynch. And yeah, it is his biggest disaster. His one disaster, let's say. Actually, he hates talking about it. Yeah. In actual fact, it brings great sadness to him. I'm not sure if he was the right person for the job, to be honest with you. I mean, before this, he made Eraserhead, which is like not the sort of you wouldn't watch.
That's pretty far removed from Dune.
Yeah.
I got the impression, based on the interviews I saw, that he was more doing it because the studio asked him to, rather than it was something of his choice.
No, he loved the book.
Yeah?
No, he loved the book.
Ah,
so basically, he did The Elephant Man, which is probably his second most commercial film at this point, and it is, I'm not saying that's a bad way because it won him awards. It is easily his most successful movie. That's not the Straight Story, but no, they headhunted him. Dino De Laurentiis wanted him to make it, and he read the book and loved it. And he wrote the screenplay himself. He adapted the book himself.
Oh, fair
which might actually have been, a part of the problem. I don't really know. When he talks about the movie now, like this film sort of represents a really, really important moment in his career because he didn't have a final cut. He didn't have the final say on the movie. The studio did.
I know that when he had finished, it was like a 3-hour movie, and they had cut it down to 2 hours 17 or something, didn't they?
4 hours. It was a 4-hour movie. Is what I heard. And they wanted 2 hours, which is insanity. And apparently, between him, Dino De Laurentiis, and his daughter, they managed to reduce it to 2 hours, and then that's when they included like the voiceover narrations and whatnot. There is a TV cut of the film. Because apparently, studios would cut films to be longer on TV because it meant more ad breaks, which meant more revenue. And David Lynch took his name off it, so it was directed by Alan Smithy. Yeah.
He's such a prolific director.
Years of work. Made some of the best and some of the worst films.
Yeah.
But there was the opening exposition. There's loads, about a 7-minute introduction in that film, including like loads of production art and stuff. I've not seen it. I've only heard about it. But the cinema cut, it has got David Lynch's name on it. There is like a studio re-release, which I think is the version you tend to get hold of nowadays, and that is 2 hours 30, I believe. But I remember my dad telling me about the film when it came out in '84 when he saw it, and he said that they handed out pamphlets with the film that explained the plot.
Yeah, and also had like glossary of terms and stuff on it, didn't they?
Yeah, I don't know.
They're throwing out terms like Bene Gesserit like straight off the bat, and you're just like, huh?
Yeah.
I mean, that's one thing I'll say about this movie is it doesn't spoon feed the story to you. You kind of have to go in everything.
Yeah, well, it does at the beginning. Princess Irulan sort of narrates like the most important aspects of it, but yeah, a lot of people did see it and they didn't know what was going on. Truth is, it's a fascinating movie to watch for my money. It has like incredible visuals. Do you not think so? Like it looks. I mean, There's some dodgy like green screen effects in it, but overall, like the costumes and the sets are just like.
I know that, yeah, because they had difficulties in getting industrial light and magic, like.
Yes.
So you can tell that as you say, the effects are touch cagey in places, but
yes,
the story itself, yeah, it is. At the end of the day, the story is what you're here for. You're not here to see sort of like special effects and over the top explosions.
I don't know, man. Like, I actually think like the insane detail in the sets, like, actually sets this apart, especially from the new one as well. And I think like, because of the amount of detail in the sets, there's a lot of like really interesting visual storytelling going on. And I think that like you get a better sense of the difference in culture between the different planets and the different companies in this film. I will say
there was one scene from that original 84. It was one of the early sequences where they bring that giant vat in with the creature inside it. And I always thought
that's a Guild Navigator.
It's only, even though it's only a minute or two, and it's like it has barely any impact on the story as a whole. But it's so visually weird that you just can't sort of look away. You're like,
it's not in the book.
Yeah.
Is it? It's not in the book. You don't.
They be in the book at all.
No, you don't see Guild Navigators until Messiah. I think we mentioned this in the previous episode. I get the impression that whole sequence was part of the attempts to make the story more understandable, because then the Navigator is sitting in front of the Emperor and saying, you know, they basically explain what's going to happen. They're going to screw over the Atreides, and then the Guild Navigator says, you must kill Paul. A Guild Navigator in Messiah is part of the conspiracy against Paul. So that is kind of like a pull, to coin a phrase, a pull in from the second book. But yeah, I was about to mention that like it sort of correlates with the Harkonnens and how they're presented in this film as well. Like I feel like it's like Lynch's influence, the use of body horror in general.
Vladimir is fucking gross. There's something about it. I mean, I'll give all due credit to Stellan Skarsgård. He was a good sort of.
We'll get to him.
Kenneth McKillen's Vladimir was just. There's something stayed with me about him. Something so gross with the black slime creep like dripping down his face and the pustules.
The heart plugs were kind of disturbing, weren't they?
I actually heard that during takes, he liked to go out to restaurants in full prosthetics.
Really?
Yeah, he used to like to fuck with people and just to like eat there as if it's like the most normal thing in the world. Which just
it does. I mean, here's the thing, right? I mentioned in the previous part that like a lot of the dialogue is overly theatrical and melodramatic, and in this version, they sort of carry that over quite a bit, and it almost makes certain characters, specifically Vladimir Harkonnen, a bit cartoony.
Yeah, he is one step away from twirling a moustache at times.
Yeah, and the sexual overtones that are there in the book, but on quite in comparison to this film version anyway, are subtle. Like they're way overplayed in this. He is like literally looking to fuck Fade Rufra.
Yeah, I remember that expression where he's literally licking his lips. And the thing is, Sting seems kind of into it.
I hate to say it, but Sting's kind of fun in this movie, you know? I kind of like him in this.
He's got that kind of like devilish grin that I kind of, you know, every time he's on Cat's Carry, he's like, okay, you've got a weird kind of Loki, I don't know what it is, sort of like the mischievous.
I know, the steam bath scene, kind of weird, obviously, but like overall, like he's actually quite a lot of fun in this.
Yeah, but you get a real sort of genuine like. I mean, I know they said they got him because they wanted the star power, but Sting brought talent with him alongside as well, and
he's fine in it. He's fine in it. Did you know that Patrick Stewart had no idea who he was? There's a really funny like story, him telling it as well, like having no idea who he is, and him being like the most famous person on set and introducing himself, and him being like, "Who are you?" But anyway, speaking of actors, we should obviously talk about the actor who plays the main character, and that is Carl MacLachlan.
Yeah.
So, you know, I think I do really love about this film is that it is a David Lynch movie, and it features like many of the classic David Lynch actors that he would use and reuse over and over again. This is Carl MacLachlan's like film debut because he was a theatre actor before this. And it's interesting that he, you then would become like a mainstay for Lynch, obviously with Blue Velvet and then Twin Peaks. He was a fan of the book as well, and I think like his theatrical abilities certainly add something to the over dramatic dialogue. He definitely gives it his all when he shouts "Long live the fighters" and is shouting at his father through the sky and stuff. But what do you think of him in this film, Mark?
I don't know. It's thing is, I mean, in the book, Paul Atreides is meant to be 15 years old.
Yes.
And this guy gives the impression of being someone who's in his mid-20s.
He's definitely too old, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to hold that against him too much because you can see he is giving it his all. He is, and this is one thing I'm going to say to you in terms of our recent research, because compared to, it's been a week since we spoke about the book.
Yeah, spoilers, we do actually record this podcast over the course of 2 weeks.
Yeah.
So we release it every 2 weeks and we record it in 2 parts, which is like, so,
And in the last week, I've done a deep dive into Dune. I thought, you know what? I'm going to break tradition. I'm actually going to do some fucking research. And I put my head down. I actually started watching a lot of retrospectives. I actually started analysing this movie and actually started to understand the character. And I was a bit harsh on Paul Atreides last week. I'm actually now that I'm actually starting to understand the character as a whole better, I'm not going to say I get it, but I've got a lot more perspective on him now.
How would you say so?
I realise that Paul is a character that, from every angle of his life, is being told who he's going to be.
Yes.
Whether it be his father telling him he's going to be his successor, whether it's got his mother saying, I hope you're going to be the Gwenen's Hazarak. I need a glossary term around this.
Kwisatz Haderach.
That's the one. And then you've got the Bene Gesserit who are turning around and saying, no, you're going to be the father of the chosen one. And then he's getting these prophetic dreams that are telling him, no, you're going to be a Messiah. And you can just see this is a man who is desperately thinking, what the fuck is the universe expecting of me? And he clearly knows that something is destined for him. And once I start to get that sort of angle of it, it's like the whole point of this is all about someone who's been given multiple destinies and is just trying to work out the best path.
Yes, this will correlate when we discuss the Denis Villeneuve adaptation.
Villeneuve.
Villeneuve. I don't know. I feel like I'm going to say it differently every single time I say it. Is it Villeneuve? Is it Villeneuve?
Denis Villeneuve.
Denis. Is it Denis Villeneuve? I'm starting to feel like. Do you remember that British comedy, Hello, Hello? Do you remember that?
Yeah, classic.
Do you remember? It's so racist and so horrible to French people, but I'll never forget. It's so racist. But you've got that the French, obviously French. The police officer that says "Good morning." Can't speak properly. That's how I feel when I'm pronouncing his name. I feel that stupid. Anyway, sorry. I was just about to say that, aside from all the subterfuge, the politics, and the religious iconography that's included in this story. What Villeneuve zeroes in on is the homecoming of the boy. The growth. The boyhood into adulthood drama. Because that really is what is at this core, isn't it? As you say, he is like a character without agency.
Exactly. The first point of agency he gets in the entire story is when he chooses to be with Chani. Everything up until that point.
I disagree with that. I disagree with that, actually. For me, yes. For me, the first moment of agency he has is when him and Jessica are kidnapped, and they're on the ornithopter, and she's being gagged because she is a Bene Gesserit, but they don't know that he's trained in the Bene Gesserit ways, the wheeling ways, so to speak, and whatnot, and the voice. And so he attempts to use the voice, and she tries to goad him to not do it, but he does it anyway. And I think that's when he actually takes positive action.
Okay, I'll give you that one.
Yeah, he takes positive action at that moment to try and to control, and he's not even a master of the voice at this point yet.
No, he is purely just spinning his wheels, trying to do something. Yeah,
it's established all the way through the narrative before this that he's forever in training. I'll get to this. It's a very important point that I was going to make, actually. And then he goes out of his way and uses his voice to free his mother so she can then, use the voice, let's say.
Yeah.
But, I actually think Carl McLachlan's a bit miscast in this.
He's trying very hard. I mean, at the end, he does achieve what he sets out to do. But you're right. I think Chalamet came closer.
We'll talk to Chalamet about Chalamet when we get to the second part. But my problem is that, like, you need to put into perspective Paul's character. Paul is the son of a duke in a universe where there is constant political subterfuge. There's political. He is constantly being trained, to defend himself. He's a martial art
protection. Yeah,
exactly, because of assassinations and whatnot. And I feel like Paul's character is quite muted in the first half of the story. Well, and Carl MacLachlan is just so fucking naturally charming. He just is. This is what makes him, as Dale Cooper in Twin Peaks, one of the greatest TV characters of all time. Like, he's just, every time he's on screen, he's just glows. And he's just so positive and so amazing and so fun and so awesome. He is literally made to play that character. And like I said, that natural charm that he has, just, it's almost too much, almost too much. Maybe they were trying to sort of present him as sort of like childlike innocence, but it doesn't come across that way to me personally. It comes across as just pure, like, incredible magnetic charm, and it's, for me personally, a bit
almost
too
much confidence, I think.
Yes.
He's very self-assured at times when he's standing there, like, facing his father, and they're both talking, and it's like,
yes,
it's like it's not something that's inherently his fault. It's an aspect of his nature. I almost feel, it's just him as an actor.
He is obviously, as I said, very good at doing the theatrical stuff because he was a theatre actor. He's got the voice, to coin a phrase, But I don't know. I do like him though. I don't know. Like, I'm not sure if I would have said he was miscast until I saw the new one or after reading the book 3 times. I'm not really sure. Like, I'm a bit of a MacLachlan fanboy, so it's just, at this point in time in my life, my current perspective is, I think he's a bit miscast. But the film is quite cheesy overall, even though it is very self-serious, and so I kind of feel like it all sort of contributes to the cheesiness. But, So what about the inner monologues then, Mark, in this film?
I kind of like them. It's
no.
I kind of like them, man. I don't know. It's hard to explain. It kind of fits, like, the whole theatre aspect that he brings to the movie.
Yeah.
The kind of like the idea of the monologue in main character. Like,
well, all of them. That's the problem. Yeah. It's the same problem. It's so many voices, and like, they're just like in the book. They're just spouting what you already know, what has already been established in the narrative.
It's very what's the word? Patronising at times to the viewer.
It's overdone a lot of the time. Like, there's a bit where, for example, when he gets spice in his hand, and he smells it, and he goes, "Spice, pure," and it's like, yes, I know, I know. It's like, in the Chalamet film, he doesn't need to do that, because of the expert directing, and I guess I don't know whose idea it was. Maybe it was Lynch's inexperience as a writer at the time, and trying to adapt something that was unadaptable, because obviously, like, the novel is a different medium to the film. So, but for me personally, they really, really, really don't work. Oh dear, but as I was saying, I love the fact that the whole Lynch gang is in this. You've got Everett McGill as Stilgar and Jack Nance as Nifford, who I just love them in this, But overall, actually, dude, I think the cast in this film is actually very good. Don't you think?
Yeah, I mean, there are one or two people that I was like, oh, that's an interesting choice.
Yeah. Virginia Madsen.
I always thought it was interesting to have Patrick Stewart as Gurney.
Wow.
So, I mean, I don't know.
Terribly miscast. Terribly miscast.
Yeah, but I still think it's interesting. Miscast. I mean, there's something about that just. I fucking love Patrick Stewart, and I'll defend him to the end of the earth because of everything he's done.
What about that scene when he's like shouting and screaming and firing a gun with a pug under his arm? Do you think that's like? Do you think that's the fact that he rescues the pug that's set up earlier in the film? Do you think that's like character building and important?
That wasn't in the book, was it?
No,
exactly.
No.
I get the impression Lynch was like, okay, bit boys, Don't no one say anything. Just tell him it's in the book, and just to see what would happen. Like, Patrick, hold this dog, and just to see what would happen next.
We've got to wait. This dog is earlier in the film. We've got to make sure it survives, otherwise there will be complaints.
Yeah.
Do you know about the story about him being actually cast by accident?
No.
So I don't know if this is true or not, but for my money, it probably is, because he is, like, so, in my opinion, so miscast in this film. Apparently, the Patrick Stewart that David Lynch was casting was not that Patrick Stewart. It was a different Patrick Stewart, and they just kept him anyway.
He's just too embarrassed to admit that he fucked it up.
or maybe he just, like, spoke in his extremely theatrical voice. You know,
I think it's an earlier scene of just having the two of them when they're doing the knife training and everything. It's just, you've got two powerhouses of theatre just kind of just going for it, and it's like, you know what? Okay, this is a pretty good scene.
Sorry, go on.
Oh, when he's training with the shields and everything like that.
Yes.
That said, the effects at that point do let it down a little bit. Those shields.
Yeah, there's like a weird story about how they animated that, and they had to, like, paint over the film meticulously frame by frame to get that effect.
Ugh, that wasn't worth the
effort. I don't know. I mean, it's 1984. You know, I mean, like, that's the thing about this movie, is that it's just so ambitious that it just sort of falters under the weight of its own ambition. If you've got to respect
it on that level, then
you do. But speaking of respect, I'll tell you someone that I don't respect, and that is Sean Young. I think she is awful in this. She is terrible as Johnny. Terrible. Yeah. She just has nothing. Maybe it's the dialogue, the direction, because she has turned in some good performances here and there, but, like, in this, I think that she's just rubbish. Totally rubbish. Maybe it's because she's in the presence of such great and fine actors, you know. But, you know, Max von Sydow, you know, he's her dad, technically speaking, in the story. There's Kynes. Just, she's terrible. She's terrible. But so, what do you think of this movie overall? Then, what's your, like, overall takeaway?
I've watched this movie multiple times over my life,
yeah.
And I mean, at one point, I tried to get my wife to get into it because I was hoping that she's, like, a massive fan of Blade Runner.
Yes,
and I'm not going to say there's parallels between Blade Runner and this, but they come from the same era of science fiction. That kind of science fiction that isn't easy to appreciate. It's a science fiction that you need to think about, and you need to dissect it a little in order to get the full enjoyment from it. But for her, it was this never really ticked her boxes, despite the fact she does love her sort of like Star Trek and the like. This just wasn't really on her radar, and me myself, I can appreciate what they were doing here. As you say, the book is unadaptable. It's so difficult to get every element of that book, and you can see what Lynch was going for, and I've got to give it credit for what it achieved.
Yeah, I agree with you, yeah.
I mean, it's got some. It takes some paths away from the book out of necessity, because at the end of the day, you're not going to be able to put everything in the book onto the screen. It's just, you'd end up with a bloated mess. Especially if you're going to try and do the world building and everything that goes into it as well, because there, as you say, Herbert specialised in world building, and that's one of the trickier things to put onto the screen without straight up having someone talk to you and explain to you what you're looking at.
Absolutely.
And there are some performances in this movie that are just a joy to watch, mainly from the Harkonnen family. So, but. Yeah, this is never going to be in my top 5 or anything like that. It's not that kind of movie for me. But
can you remember when you first watched it?
I was very young when I watched it. I think I was in mid-teens. I might have caught it on television or something like that. Like, I didn't know anything about it at that point. I think it was not long before I found the book. And I think watching that movie and kind of sort of like half watching it, but kind of being a bit like, what is this? And then sort of like finding the book and realizing that this is the story that had been adapted. That's what made me read the book in my slightly older teen years. But I do know I saw the movie first.
Oh, right, okay. I think, like, I saw this movie as a youngster, because there's always been something ingrained in my mind, or there's been the image of Kyle MacLachlan as Paul has been ingrained in my mind. When I first read the book, before I saw the film as an adult, I was like, I have, you know how sometimes you like just associate characters with faces in books, and you just can't help it, and they just become an actor or something that you've seen in the film. You do that?
Yeah.
Yeah. When I first read this book, it was Colm McLaughlin straight away, and like that, I feel like I saw the film when I was very young. I can almost remember seeing it when I was very young. I almost feel like my dad might have said that we thought it was boring as well, because it is quite boring for children. And like I say, it's quite self-serious. But yeah, I think the biggest problem with this movie is that like it's the pacing, because like the first like half of the movie and therefore the half of the book is kind of paced okay. And just like the book, which rushes to the end, the film version it's way too quick. It's so quick. Just so much happens in such a short space of time. There's like no time devoted to Chani, no time to with Stilgar, with Paul, with the Fremen in general. It's just bash bash boosh. You know, he becomes the leader. You know, they fight the Harkonnens and then whatever, and then Arya's born, and she's got that weird voice, and like then it's the end of the movie.
Yeah, that kid was creepy, man. Seriously.
Yeah. Quizart Haderach.
Yeah.
So weird. But I'll get to that a bit of dialogue in a minute, actually. But I will say though, however, in terms of like tone and feel, I really like this movie. Like I kind of think your mention of Blade Runner is in some ways like relative but not. Like Blade Runner is a movie that excels within its boundaries because of the smart way it was made, filmed at night for starters, and the size and scope of the story is much smaller than Dune. Dune is like, I mean, there's a reason why they didn't even attempt Lord of the Rings for another 15 years, because it's just too grand in scope, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And
this is just on a level similar to that in terms
exactly. I mean, can you imagine how bad Lord of the Rings would have looked if they attempted it in 1984? So, as you say, you have to credit the film with trying. And I think what this film manages most effectively is its tone and feel. It feels like Lynch is so good at sort of bringing like an uncomfortable aura out in his movies. His forte is filming, because he is an arter. He is an art director, really. Filming the normal and making it weird. Bringing out the weirdness and everything. One of the most famous shots in Twin Peaks is a shot of a fan spinning up a set of stairs. And every time he shows it to you, it's just so it's so weird. It's just something about it. And he's very good at that and bringing out the unsettling nature of normality. And this is completely against that, but he also is very good at like filming the weird as well. And yeah, he really does manage to, I don't know what it is. There's a strange aura that emanates from this movie. The soundtrack as well by Toto, which is fucking weird as fuck, but it is quite good.
What the actual
the ending credit cheesy like rock song with the fucking faces in the credits is awful. Awful.
That was
so bad and cheesy. It's like a soap opera. But like, what is great is Brian Eno's theme, the prophecy theme, and which is played when Paul drinks the water of life. And if I remember correctly, in the book, worms just don't randomly appear and bow to him or anything. But it is really effective in the film because of the music and the moment, and it's like this. It is just magical almost and awful. But at the same time, this film kind of gets the point of the book completely wrong. Gets the theme of the book completely wrong, Mark.
How so?
So, Paul becoming emperor is actually a tragedy.
Because of the ensuing jihad that was going to happen because of his ascension.
Correct. And it's not really presented like that in the film. And then he does like a Jesus Christ move and brings water to Arrakis, right?
It starts raining right when he ascends, doesn't it? So
there's something very wrong with that.
It's almost like the universe agrees with him becoming the...
No. In the narrative, basically, the water of life is a baby worm drowned in water to create poison because the worms are allergic to water.
Mm-hmm.
And he threatens the Emperor with destroying the spice and then summons rain when he's Emperor on a planet with worms on it that create the spice that are allergic to water.
That's a valid point, thinking about it now.
It's almost like they were sort of focusing on the superhero, super Jesus, super prophet side of the story.
There's this whole other side of you're poisoning our gods right now. So
no, I don't think they were thinking about that. I was thinking more about just a Jesus analogy, really, and making it rain, and like the fact that that's the moment when Arya goes, "For him, the Kwisatz Haderach." It's almost like the superhero genesis, like in a Marvel movie or something, and it just is tonally so wrong, so wrong. Oh my god! However, there is something that this film does differently to the books and the other film that I think is better. There is one thing.
What's that?
It's the weirding way. Right? The weirding way is just like some Bene Gesserit martial art that they share with the Fremen.
Yeah.
In this film, it's them saying words into a sonic module that creates like a sonic blast. They go, and it's so silly. And it's so fucking
Skyrim energy to it, hasn't it?
Pre-Skyrim. It's fucking brilliant. It's so funny. But do you know what's really fucking clever and really cool about it? Is that it is noted that when they use his name, when they go, Muad'Dib, the power is even greater. He's noticed it's even stronger when they say my name. And that makes perfect sense with like crazy religious zealots who are about to go to war. They're going to shout his name.
Yeah.
Yeah. I thought, well, that's bloody clever, actually. She really liked that idea. Really cool. I kind of actually thought it was better than... I don't think Herbert was ever interested in action, as we stated earlier on. I don't think he was that bothered about. And even the giant bloody sandworms, like fucking attacking like Arrakeen at the end, is a paragraph long, So, he was. I don't think he would even have cared about any of that. But speaking of the sandworms, how do you feel about how the sandworms were presented?
They looked good in this. I mean, you're talking the 80s effects. I mean, how good can they look? So,
the stop motion, they looked good.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure about the design. Because the design on like a lot of the book covers is like the flat mouth, and I'm not sure if it's in this book, the first book, or in the later book, sort of described that there's like an energy source inside them. Because I imagine probably it was in one of the later books because that's when Herbert gets more in depth with like the genesis of the Spice Melange, and you get the impression there's like some kind of like force inside them that helps generate the spice, but that's not in any of that's more on the covers than it is in either of the films. But they were a very different design to what I've seen elsewhere. But I liked it, I kind of liked it. As I said, like the sequence where Paul drinks the water of life is especially potent in this movie when all the worms appear around him. So yeah. So for my money, Mark, the bottom line for this movie is a fucking mess of a movie. Really,
it's a very flawed masterpiece.
The book is a flawed masterpiece. This is not a masterpiece. This is just flawed. It's very, very, very flawed.
Well, he got halfway there, then, didn't he?
Yeah, it's just
this movie. If love it or hate it, it is still one of those ones that was when I was younger. And people talked about science fictions. This was never in the top 5. They turned around and said, "Oh, you got to see this movie," but it was still one that came up in conversation eventually. And when you were talking about science fiction movies, like, you should check out Dune. It's an interesting movie. Don't know if it'd be your sort of thing, but
that's what you say, though, isn't it? You don't say, "Oh, you must see Dune." You say, "It's an interesting movie," meaning there's a caveat to it. there's a but.
It's got something in it. It's a interesting curiosity that comes out of that era.
Yes.
Of,
yes.
Cinematic sort of adaptions.
Yes, it's a curiosity for Lynch fans. It's a curiosity for
sci-fi fans.
Sci-fi fans. For everyone else, it's an avoid, in my opinion.
Yeah, if anyone else who doesn't have either of those interests in their heart are going to look at this and go, "What in the actual fuck am I watching?"
Yeah. So yeah, the bottom note for me is that it is a mess, but it is a beautiful mess, though. It's a very, very, very beautiful mess.
Yeah.
Its pacing is just awful. I rewatched it a couple of weeks ago, and I was like, but then what do you expect? Villeneuve has transcribed that book into a nearly 5-hour movie.
It's going to be 5 hours, yeah.
And he's skipped a lot.
Got a lot more. He's allowed the story to breathe.
Well, he's cherry picked the elements that he feels is important. But even at nearly 5 hours, he's still cutting. Still cutting. So the fact that this is even a 2.5 movie is just absolute insanity for my money. Absolute insanity. The studio's asking for it to be 2 hours long. What the fuck?
Yeah, 600-page plus book in a 2-hour movie.
What the hell? What were they thinking? They're thinking about money. That's all they were thinking about. They expected it to be like a Star Wars level franchise. Did you know that?
I can see. It came out 7 years after Star Wars came out. Yeah.
So
they were looking for a potential kind of this could be our new Star Wars sort of franchise. And it's like, nah, this ain't Star Wars, mate.
Very different.
I mean, while Star Wars can say that it took some elements from this, it's not the same.
It's funny, I kind of feel like a Dune movie, even today, has got the same hurdles to cross as a Neuromancer movie. Because, like Dune, Neuromancer was so influential and so ahead of its time, but not adapted quick enough, that all the filmmakers that read the book when it was released have already taken its ideas and put it on screen. Yeah. So when you come to see Dune, you're like, that's kind of like Tremors. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I love Tremors, man.
Don't get me wrong,
you're right.
I love Tremors.
But you're right, the idea of worms that are attracted to noise, yeah.
And sand, and not just that Star Wars as well. Are modern day Star Wars fans going to go and watch a Dune movie? Were Star Wars fans going to watch a Dune movie in 1984? That's the real question we need to ask.
And you've got the political subterfuge even of houses and all of that Game of Thrones style kind of sort of like politicking and assassination taking place behind the scenes and stuff. That's
incidentally was in the Star Wars prequels, funny enough. Ironically,
you're right. This is a franchise. Well, I say franchise. This is a movie and a concept that has been pillaged by people that hold it in reverence. They haven't ripped it off, but you can see where they've seen concepts. They think that's a really good idea, and then it's been used later. And you're right. Now bringing it out, it will lead to that whole. Well, this came first, but everyone else is going to say we've seen these concepts before.
There needs to be something very special, doesn't there? Well, or it needs to be a well-made movie in the first place, doesn't it, to succeed? Which I suppose is a good jumping-off point to take a break, maybe, unless you've got anything else to say about this film.
No, I think we nailed it, man.
Yeah, and we'll be right back to chat about was it 2021? 3 years ago now, my God.
Yeah.
2021 adaptation of the first half of the book. So be right back. Okay, welcome back to the podcast. So, jumping straight into this, while I was a big fan of the most recent Blade Runner 2049, and we'll save that for another podcast, Mark, alongside Blade Runner 2049 and Arrival, personally for me, I, at the time, did not think there was anyone better to make this movie.
Yeah.
I've criticised Herbert's dialogue enough to this point, and again, I think it's a problem with the Lynch film as well. They tried to replicate Herbert's style, too accurately, and they don't adapt the book into a different medium enough.
Well, what's written on the page doesn't sound as good when it's spoken on screen, sort of thing.
Absolutely, to quote Harrison Ford, you can write this shit, George, but you damn well can't say it. It's true. It's true in many ways. And if there's one thing that I can say about Villeneuve's version is that while it is the closest we've gotten to the novel, it definitely has one foot in modern movie-making sensibilities and not to its detriment. How do you feel about that statement?
I would agree with that, to be honest.
Yeah.
It manages to walk the line on it a bit better.
I will elaborate on these points very shortly. So, Part 1 was released in 2021. Did you see it at the cinema?
I did not, no. As I say, man, Dune was never one of my passions.
Doesn't matter, though. This is like a visual treat, I'd see all of his movies at the cinema now. All of them. Like, even if it's got Roger Deakins or not, making them on the cinematography, I'll always see his films at the cinema because they all look incredible. Even his lesser film, like less grandiose films, look incredible. While I would personally say that the sets are more impressive in the Lynch movie, this film is just huge. The sense of scale is just absolutely ginormous. It almost feels like, I think they shot the 84 version on location, but it kind of feels like they only ever shot a small amount of desert, whereas in this, it feels like they shot a lot of desert.
Oh, there are moments like when I think it's right at the beginning where you just see him just walking past the ships with all the troops and everything, and the size, the distance.
Yes.
It's just, it does look more like an empire has come to visit Arrakis. And rather than just sort of like a couple of people have hopped on a ship and we're popping down to say hello. This feels like an actual, like a noble house has come to declare a statement. The difference is quite palpable.
How do you feel about the split into two? Do you think it was the right choice?
It probably was. Because, as you say, the first movie hammered through the plot line at its lean 2.5, 2 hours 17, however, whatever it was. Whilst this, the alternative would be, you could have a condensed 3-hour Lord of the Rings style movie, which even then I'd still think would probably feel a little rushed. Splitting it into two was probably the right call.
Yeah. Like, for you and me, we know the basic plot of the story, but I think maybe for the casual cinema goer, it might have been a concern. I know that I heard people saying who don't know much about the books were like, this has got no ending. Where's the ending? And while they tried their best to have an ending, which we'll get. The
thing is, I've once heard Herbert referred to the story of Dune as coital, in terms of the fact that it's almost like the act of sex.
That's what I said in Part 1, Mark.
Fair enough. That might be where I picked up. It also is what I picked up in somewhat of my research.
Yeah, that's
but
right.
The whole point this is a story that slowly builds. There's no Fresalt's pyramid. Fresalt?
Yes.
Yeah.
Freytag. There is.
But they're not as well defined as, like, say, for instance, your classic John Wick or your Matrix or something like that. These are much more slower, building to a natural climax that's meant to occur when he finally ascends.
You need to look, to continue that metaphor, the Freytag's pyramid does apply to this, but there are multiple Freytag pyramids. And what you've got to sort of say, the way you got to look at it is like, say there's 3 pyramids for the 3 acts, which is generally regarded to be the optimal length of a movie. Each pyramid gets steeper per act in a coital narrative. So, to quote the great Aid Edmondson, the second film should not be steep; it should be effing vertical.
The man was a true wordsmith. I don't wish to speak of him before his time. So.
Yes. So what do you think of the cast, Mark, in this film?
This is an interesting cast as well. Mm-hmm. He has got some powerhouses in it.
Yes.
Start at the top. Let's get into Timothée Chalamet. I'm going to Timothée
Chalamet.
I believe that might actually be the pronunciation of his name.
Is it really? I thought it was Timothy.
I have been doing some research, man.
Okay, fine. I apologise for laughing.
Timotei is a type of shampoo that my mum used to use in the 90s.
Yeah, of course.
Nonetheless, Timotei or Timothy. We'll just call him Charlemagne. That's easy.
Call him Charlemagne because that makes us seem more like, respectful, more academic, more academic.
Yes, I found that Charlemagne was...
this Charlemagne fellow.
Yes. He was on point in terms of bringing a bit more of the uncertainty that needs to be in Paul. That he's younger, he looks the part in that regard.
Yes.
And considering that I haven't seen him in much, but I'm hearing a lot of his name these days in terms of the fact that he is an up and comer. And the only other thing I've ever seen him in is Wonka. And I enjoyed him in Wonka. And this is so far a departure from that character in terms of a whimsical daydreamer to this kind of almost oppressed guy that's having destiny thrust upon him. He really is quite a talented actor.
Yes, he is. I would say he is a good actor. I have it in writing almost that, he, as a man who is quite feminine in stature, let's say, he is very attractive. But his thinness, let's say, works to his advantage, and it makes him seem younger, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Than he actually is in this film. He seems closer to the 15-year-old Paul than, let's say, McLaughlin was in the 84 version. Yeah, I think he captures the spirit of the character a little better for me, personally.
He's not hunching over or being unassuming or anything like that, but you can see the defiance in him, the same as...
There's more of that, though. There's more of that defiance in him in this version. It's more pronounced. There's that moment where he blames Jessica for breeding a monster, which I don't think is even in the 84 movie, which is, that's how you would expect a teenager to act.
Yeah,
to blame them.
Yeah.
Exactly.
The kind of, wanted the chosen one, I'm trying to be the chosen one.
Yeah. Why do I have to be the chosen one in the fucking first place? You fucking horrible cunting mum.
Yeah, exactly.
You know what I mean?
You would expect some rebellion at that age, and there would be a certain sense of teen angst justified.
Yes. And it's more, and while maybe McLaughlin's Paul is more relatable because he's a nicer guy than he is in this, I find him more believable in this version. As I mentioned earlier, Paul was brought up in a world of subterfuge. He's trained in knife fighting, in wearing a shield, in weapons. He's asked to sit in on political meetings with his dad so he can learn political subterfuge. He's taught to watch his back forever and to watch out for the Harkonnens because they're brutal, as he says in the film. And I find a more serious actor, a more serious performance just works better for the character. I find it more believable, and I find him more believable as the oncoming religious leader, prophet that he's going to be. Whereas Carl McLaughlin, I'm just, I don't know. Look, the words that come out of his mouth, he performs very well, but I just think Charlemagne was I think he was the right man for the job, and I think he was very effective in this. Captured the spirit of the character. Oscar Isaac is an actor I'm on and off with. He was fine. He was fine. He's fine in Star Wars. Horribly miscast in X-Men, but in most things I've seen him in, I think he's an okay actor. But I actually think that Duke Leto Atreides is the most improved character in this adaptation. I think this interpretation of the character is better than the book version.
Mm-hmm.
Because that notion that the reason why Shaddam IV is looking to remove Leto in the first place is because of his charisma. Because of how empathetic he is. And we get such a stronger sense of his relationship with Paul and Jessica. It's so much more believable. As mentioned, Jessica goes against the wishes of her order to give Leto a son because that's what he wants, and you can believe that because I'd give him a son. I was fully on board with him and believed in him.
You've got the scene with the Sandcrawler, for instance, where it shows
the
table snaps and he willingly goes in to save his men, and he does explain it later. He turns around and goes, it's because of he wants to, because they're important. And you can see that he's trying to justify it in some regard of being, although they are resources as well. But the same token, this is a man that is willing to risk his own sort of safety. And that's something that resonates with his men. That's why he is a leader of men, because he.
Yes.
And that's why men are willing to follow him.
Yes. I thought he was excellent in this movie, and I thought the part was very well adapted. It's an example of how they've looked at what is in the book and they've actually improved in order to transfer it to the big screen.
Yeah.
Another improvement, but from the 1984 movie, is Stellan Skarsgård as the Baron. We know Skarsgård from obviously Chernobyl, the TV series, which we mentioned in episode 3. What did you think of him as the Baron, Mark?
Yeah, he was a different kind of creepy, wasn't he? A lot more smooth, but
very smooth all over.
Yeah, but in both cases, they've both got those the repulsor engines on them that allow them to levitate. And there is something unsettling about this guy. He's
let's say in the 84 movie, he spins around comically and it looks stupid.
Yeah.
But then when he levitates in this film, it's almost unsettling.
Because it's almost kind of, he just slowly rises.
Yeah. He's got it because he's too fat. This is just a fact. But, it's not played for laughs.
No, it gives him an ominous tone.
Yeah.
And it's also, this is a man at the end of the day who is a creature of depravity and gluttony. And these are the things, at all times, he is looking to sate one of those things, whether it be his greed or his sexual desires. And this one was a lot more understated than Macmillan's version, and in some ways it made it all the more threatening.
He made it more believable as a threat.
Yeah, because this is like, if you've got your villain sort of like with his kind of threat up front and he's literally yelling it at you, it doesn't feel as threatening as a villain that keeps it quiet and stares at you with his eyes and tells you everything you need to know through the expression.
He tells characters what they need to know through the novel, not the audience. Not the novel, in this film version. He tells people what they need to know. And it's not about expository information for the audience, which I think is very smart. Yeah. Very, very smart.
Because at the end of the day, this is a guy that's meant to be the head of a house that's in direct competition with the biggest house in terms of
up until this point, the Harkonnens are the biggest house because they're the ones who are in charge. They're the ones who are in charge. So they're removed, and then the Atreides become the biggest house because they have Arrakis. But
and the whole point is that whilst Macmillan's was entertaining to watch, there are times when you think this guy's in charge of the biggest house in the universe.
Yeah,
but Skarsgård, you could believe that more. You can
presence, isn't it? It's presence. Isn't it? He had a presence. Yes, I thought he was very, very effective. Very, very effective. What did you think of Rebecca Ferguson as Jessica and the character of Jessica in this?
She was okay. She seemed more... there's one thing I remember about Francesca Rennie is that I kept getting distracted by her hair. Like, that hair was so perfectly...
Our hair. That's some powerful hair.
It really was. It's like 30% hair every time I looked at her. So...
Yeah.
And I think that took away from the character a little bit because it looked a little too sort of like perfect.
Well, it was just the elaborate costuming that was in the film in general, though, wasn't it?
Exactly. And Ferguson looks a lot more sort of natural by comparison to when she's acting and in her eyes. That sequence where she's gagged and she's just looking at Paul. That's an image that stayed with me. There's something about how she emotes with her eyes that was just very well done.
Yeah, but also when she does the voice, though, she's fucking terrifying.
Yeah.
Very good. I do have a little bit of a critique, though, for the adaptation of this character, but I'm not 100% sure how I feel about it. In the book, the Bene Gesserits specifically do not really show much in the way of emotion outwardly because they are in complete control of their bodies. And there are multiple sequences of her showing emotion, especially during the Gom Jabbar test, where she's crying all the time. And she does a lot of crying in this film. In the other film, Jessica spends a lot of time in peril because as well, and obviously this is a different medium, and I feel like without the inner monologue, we can't see that outwardly she's being stern and careful in front of her superiors, such as the Bene Gesserits, but inside she is fearing for the life of her son.
Yeah,
whereas without the monologue in a visual medium, we're not able to intuit that, are we? Really, unless the music. But I wonder if it was like a stylistic choice, a choice in the medium to have her emote more than she does in the book. But I like her. I liked her though. I did like her. I did like her. But yeah, regarding the monologues, thank fuck there's no monologues. Thank fuck. Oh my god, I'm very happy about that. What did you think about Kynes being gender swapped?
That didn't actually concern me too much. I mean,
I thought it was a good thing, actually. I thought it was a good thing.
The character itself, I mean, the gender doesn't come into it in terms of what their character brings to the story.
He's more important in the book. He's way more important in the book.
But the fact is, what he brings to the story in the book isn't dependent upon his gender.
Absolutely, and also the book is a bit of a sausage fest.
Mm-hmm.
You
can't have them all be princesses in need of like.
So I was like, okay with it personally. But in my opinion, I would probably say that this kind of is the film's strong point, is that they were very careful about how they adapted the story. They thought very carefully about what they were going to present to us, the cinema goer, the film goer. It's hard to say specifically because I know the book and the film. It's hard to put myself in the position of a cinema goer who doesn't know the story and say to you, I felt that they presented the story effectively enough for someone to be able to understand what's going on. Because, as we have stated over and over and over again, this is a complex narrative overall. Mm-hmm. But trying to look at it from the perspective of a viewer who doesn't know the story very well, seeing that they're focused more on, the growing up story of Paul on the backdrop of the world stage, I felt like I said, they made a lot of very, 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 very smart choices. Because it is basically a coming of age story, the coming of age of a prophet, But there was enough of the backstory to create and present the conflict of the narrative for us to understand. And also, I thought one thing that I thought was quite smart is that they showed Paul studying Arrakis. Do you remember?
Mm.
On Caladan, the Atreides homeworld.
I mean, I even saw parallels drawn between the fact that when he was on his homeworld, he was touching water, and on his homeland, he was just because his homeworld is a very lush and almost paradise style planet.
In comparison, yes.
And then when he's on Arrakis, one of the first things he does is touch the sand.
Yes.
And instantly, that's his connection with the terrain. And comparing it to his own world.
Yes. Yeah, I like the fact that he was watching like those hologram videos that were explaining the ecology of the planet.
That's a good way of expositing the concepts that you're trying to get across, rather than having characters say, as we all know, actually have the character learning, which in a believable situation.
Absolutely, it says a lot about the character himself, that he's smart and resourceful and intelligent and looking to learn himself. He is a progressive character who will learn as he goes and wishes to learn. And at the same time, gives the audience a little quick snapshot of the information that would have been heavy-handedly narrated in a series of animated sequences in another adaptation, which is what it is, how it is presented, in the original film, aside from Irulan's narrations. So I just wanted to go through a few changes in this film that, for good or for ill, I'm cool with or not cool with. The Sardaukar not being dressed as Harkonnens. When they join forces with the Harkonnens and retake Arrakeen from the Atreides, in the book they are dressed as Harkonnens to hide the fact they are the Emperor's private army.
The Emperor didn't want to show that he was in league with Harkonnen to remove Leto.
So how do you feel about this change then in the film?
I feel that that's something that's... I do feel that kind of lends itself a little bit to the duplicity of the Emperor. And, I mean, at the end of the day, it doesn't damage the story too much to have it taken out, but I do think that's an important element to kind of show the character of the Emperor himself.
What you mean, the fact that in the book, the fact he's hiding it is important to his character, you say, and it's yeah. I mean, I was thinking hard about this earlier on today, and again, this is a film; it's a visual medium. And maybe the reason why, because there's a bit of time spent on their home planet. You see that the visual storytelling on their home planet, where there's like the chanting, there's the reverse crucified soldiers whose blood is being used for whatever reason. In the book, it's explained that like they kill like maybe 8 out of 10, inductees to the Sardaukar are the best of the best, and maybe they had them have their own visual style just for the sake of separating them from everything else. Maybe it was for the sake of the visual narrative. I don't know. Or maybe it suggests an element of arrogance in the Emperor.
I can see that. I mean, the whole point is that I'm the Emperor, my will is absolute.
Yeah. Get fucked, Kind of interesting. Like, you can look at it in multiple ways, but I wonder. I reckon it's a bit of a mishmash of everything. What about, as you mentioned earlier on, when when Leto rescues the sandcrawler?
Yeah.
And Paul actually steps out of the ornithopter to help the farmers escape. I mean, that is not what happens in the book.
No, I feel at that point I was a little bit like, Paul, what are you doing?
Yeah.
And when he starts to kind of wander off a little bit, doesn't he?
I feel like it's flawed adaptation and narrative construction that is not necessarily essential, but relevant because it serves purpose. Yes, it is kind of like, no, Paul, you shouldn't be doing that. Would your dad let you do that?
Get back in the ship.
But at the same time, maybe it's showing that Paul has a bit of kindness in him, like his dad.
Yeah, I mean,
early on in the story, and also it's a way to get Paul into the spice ASAP.
Yeah,
because the reason why he trips out is because he is, the Kwisatz Haderach on the way, and he reacts to the spice in an extreme way. He's not come into contact with spice like that before, although he's been having since being, the spice is at the heart of the Bene Gesserit, plan and their order, but he hasn't come into contact with himself as a grown boy, and I feel like we needed to see him come into contact with it, which it's forgivable in my opinion. It's forgivable. It's kind of a stupid character moment, but at the same time, like when adapting these complex books into like shorter running times, I feel like, because for my degree I had to do this as well. Actually, I had to do a bit of this. Adapting medium to medium, you do kind of end up writing yourself into like brick walls. You're like, we need to get these characters to here in this amount of time. We need to cut this out because it's superfluous. But this scene that happens earlier in the book or later in the book has this important moment that we need the audience to understand. But then they also have to think about the running time and the fact that this film is split into two. So I think they were bringing elements of what happens in book 2 into book 1. Sorry, film 2 into film 1.
You get that a lot of times in adaptations where when they're adapting the material as like if it's multi-book series where they're adapting it into a like cinematic or television, where they'll go, okay, we're going to cut that out because that's not important right now, and then you get about 2 books later, and you're like, holy shit, that was actually quite important. Okay, so we're going to pretend like that was always the case, and it's
look at fucking the complete absence of the Emperor and the Chome Company in this film. For starters, this is really fucking important. Really, really important stuff. Like, the Emperor is the reason why all this fucking happens in the first place. It's not even the Harkonnens. He removes the Harkonnens from bloody, Dune, Arrakis, to get rid of fucking, it's that same political notion. I can't remember the technique, but Vladimir does it as well. You put a really horrible dictator leader in charge, a puppet leader, and then you remove him to gain favor with the people. And I can't remember what it's called. Someone out there will know it, and this instance will go, no, Gavin, you're stupid, it's this. The Emperor is doing this to the Harkonnens, effectively, and not only that, but Vladimir does it with his own people. Because what character is it? It's the character Batista plays. He puts Batista in charge.
Glossy Raban.
Yeah, puts Raban, thank you, in charge and says to him, choke the life out of them. But really, the reason why he's doing that, which goes back to Vladimir Harkonnen being devious, he is lying, to his own family and telling them to be horrible so that he can use him as a puppet and then become lead. When he becomes leader himself, he'll look better. It's the same thing. This is so important in the narrative, to the subterfuge, to the politics, but, elements of it in the film, but the fact the Emperor's not even in it. And the Emperor's played by Christopher Walken in this in Part 2.
Christopher Walken, man, I swear to God, I'm looking forward to seeing that.
I don't know what to say. I
really hope they gave him no direction. I swear to God, I really want him just to come out in full Walken mode and just be like, fuck yeah. Just give it all of that strange inflection and strange pauses and looking off camera to look at the cue cards. I want all of that. I mean,
we will see. We will see. But my final point I wanted to bring up about a change in this movie is actually to do with the climax of the movie, which we were talking about climaxes earlier on, because another sequence they bring forward into this film is Paul's knife fight with Jamis, which happens much later on. And I imagine that they brought this forward mainly because they needed to have some kind of fist fight at the end of the film for the sake of mainstream audiences, right?
Yeah, some sort of conflict or some sort of much more direct kind of physical interaction.
Yeah. But I kind of also like its allegorical implications as well, because Paul, obviously, as well as having visions of Shani, who is hardly in this, Paul has visions of Jamis as a teacher, doesn't he? He has visions that this character is going to teach him really important things, become his Fremen teacher. And in actual fact, he kills him. But these visions, the visions that he has, are like reflections of what might happen, aren't they? Often that's how visions are.
I think it's also the first time of defiance of destiny.
I think it's more about the fact that it's a ritualistic killing and he's changed forever afterwards. It teaches him the Fremen way.
Yeah. I think because they have those sort of what they do with the body afterwards, it kind of gives him an education in that as well.
Yep. Exactly.
It makes absolute sense where they have the death stills, where they're your body is yours, but your water belongs to the tribe.
Yes. That's all the culture. We'll get more of that in book 2. Film 2, hopefully, because we get more of that in book 2 because that's when he spends time with them and learns all about them and learns all the secrets and everything. But yeah, I like the idea that this is symbolic. If I remember correctly, I can't remember if it's in this film or it's in the first film or it's in the book. But Jessica comments he's never killed anyone before. And it's it's an important turning point because he's going to have to kill a lot of people after this, and it's part of the coming of age narrative.
And is this the first time he's killed somebody? I mean,
he has not killed anyone up until this point in the story.
Yeah, this is a watershed moment for him as a character.
Yeah. I think it was quite smart they brought it forwards. So, yeah. Yes. There is actually, tell a lie, Mark. There is one final point I need to bring up. I may well in the past have voiced my distaste with Jason Momoa. I was
trying to bring this up, man. I was waiting for the moment. I was like, you've got unbearded Momoa, man. How do you feel about him? Duncan, Idaho, go!
I like him in this film.
That's a surprise.
Yeah. I think that I don't think Jason Momoa can do anything but play Jason Momoa. He has not got the range. But
it's the character that falls within that range.
I mean, he's nothing like the character in the fucking book. Mm-hmm. He's nothing like the character in the bloody film. In the film version, he's hardly in it at all, really. Oh, no, it's Patrick Stewart. Sorry, I'm thinking of...
Gurney, yeah.
Gurney, who's very good in this. Very, very good in this.
The thing about Gurney is I have to compete between the likes of whether or not Stewart or Brolin does it better. And I like both of those actors for different
Stewart
reasons.
plays Duncan, though, doesn't he?
No, man. No, Richard Jordan plays Duncan.
Oh, they sort of merged. Is it me or do they sort of mess about with the characters in that fucking first film?
Potentially, because they do kind of sort of like it does feel a little bit mixed up. Because when I was watching the things, I was a bit kind of
because it is Duncan. It's Duncan who no, it's Gurney
who teaches him shield fighting at the beginning, and that's Brolin and Stewart.
Does Stewart teach him the sword fighting in the '84 film?
Yes, he does.
Oh fuck me, mate! I can't remember. Anyway, both actors miscast on paper, but but Momoa, I feel like he was there to bring in the casual audience because he does his Momoa jokes. Like he does the fucking Marvel. There's one Marvel joke in the film, isn't there? When he says like, "You've put on weight." Have I? No. There's one Marvel joke in the whole film, and that was in the trailer, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's trailer bait.
That's all it is. And I feel like he was in it just to
I will say that there is something badass in the way in which he salutes with his blade.
I like that. Yeah, I like
that. The last stand was cool for him as well.
Yes. Well, they did a good job in showing their relationship on screen. It seemed like they cared about each other and they liked each other quite a lot.
That's one thing they actually said about the whole idea, like in terms of these videographies that I was watching, was the whole concept of like soldiers who have respect for the family of the leader they follow, and how do you do that? How do you relate that well? And Momoa hit the right tone of showing just enough of kind of respect, but at the same time, almost kind of like a not mentor, but kind of like an older brother.
Yeah,
to Paul, he hit the right tone for that.
Yeah. Yeah, it was good, and they had a good chemistry on screen, so
it worked well.
Yeah. I was concerned about him when I saw it was in the film. I was concerned, but he basically played Aquaman and Conan combined in this film because that's all he can do, and
it worked for the scenes that he was needed for.
Yeah, he's all right.
Another guy.
I don't know if you know this or not, but we will be getting more of him as well, because Duncan is in other Dune books. Not saying how or where because of spoilers, but he is.
I've heard something about this. Yeah.
So,
what about what with Glosser Raban, Batista's outing? Because he's been proving himself to be quite capable when it comes to.
He's pretty much. He could have been played by anyone in this film.
Yeah.
He was in it because he looks good. Raban needs to look a bit fat
and big, imposing,
and imposing because he acts like an imposing governor. Because
that's one thing they say about Raban is that whilst he's imposing, he's not very bright. He's not very
he's not
to his uncle and everything.
But he's not like anything in this film really. Maybe he'll get more in the next film, but the problem is in the next film you've got Fayed Rufa, who is going to be in the next film a lot. And for the looks of things, is looking to be very well represented as well. So I think Raban's going to be sidelined quite a lot in this next one, which is no loss in my opinion because he's not really that important. He's just like a placeholder in the book. He's a placeholder in the film and irrelevant as far as I'm concerned.
It is a shame because we know Batista can bring it when it's needed.
He was great in Blade Runner. He was great in Blade Runner.
Yeah, I mean, a very small part, but he did well.
He was very good in it. He was very good in it. He has his moments as Drax, I suppose, but yeah.
He's got surprising range for a guy that was just a pro wrestler. So he certainly has the same route as Rock.
Were there any other characters you want to talk about?
I think that covers everyone as far as I'm concerned in terms of.
There's one more character that's really important we must talk about.
Who's that?
The worms. How do you feel about the worms in this?
There's that one scene where Chalamet is running across the sand with the worm chasing him, and he stops, and the worm rises up in front of him, and you get that sense of majesty that comes from them.
Again, it's different from the book, and it's different, obviously, to the Lynch version. The Lynch version is a bit more accurate, but I like this change.
That scene really kind of lends itself more, like it gives the worm something. An extra level. I don't know. Hard to explain. I don't really have the words for it, but it just these worms were different, and I really liked him in this. I mean, when what's her name? The ecologist.
Hines.
Yeah, when she dies by hammering. Yeah, when she hammers down on the sand and so just chooses, you're not the one that's going to kill me, and then she starts hitting the sand and allows herself to be devoured by her own god. that is a badass scene. That is that's the way you go out. If you want to like fuck over your enemies and go, you're not the one that fucking kills me. I'm going to die under my own god. And just the way in which the sand sinks, scenes like that were really cool.
Yeah. Yeah, the scene when like the worm stops and looks at Paul is kind of interesting because it's got a bit of
intelligence almost to it in terms of the way.
Well, it's suggested that a Fremen starts a thumper, and that's what stops the worm. But I don't think you can hear the thumper when the worm first stops, and it's only afterwards when the worm goes that you can hear the thumper. But it's kind of close. And I feel like Villeneuve, he himself said that he likened the idea to just looking at your god. But I mean, is that Paul or the worm looking? It's hard to say. It's a bit of both, isn't it?
An acknowledgement of each other. So.
Yeah. And like, while the mysticism of the Dune universe is not science fiction, and so therefore, I suppose, if you were to like absorb a certain amount of this chemical and suddenly be able to see the future, I don't really think there's a problem with a worm sensing that you're a god as well, or you sensing that a worm is a god at the same time. I don't think either of his, I don't think it's unbelievable. I thought it was, I think it's more for the audience, though, to say that this is coming, this is going to happen. Do you know what I mean? It's foreshadowing more than anything else for the audience, because, as stated earlier on, the big payoff really is the worms fighting alongside the Fremen fighting alongside the worms. That's the payoff of the Dune story.
Yeah, we know that's coming, and
it's like in the book we get a paragraph and it's hinted at, and that's it. But we get a few other good scenes, like when he first finds the worm.
I hope that they will deliver a little more on that one in these movies.
Well, we don't get any of it, do we? I mean, if it was closely adapted from the book, then we wouldn't get even a hint of it. We wouldn't get Kynes. I don't think that's not how Kynes dies in the book, so that would never have happened. And we don't see random worm riders at the end when Paul's going after the Fremen in the book either. So, there's no suggestion that there's going to be a connection at all. So I feel like this was like a smart, show, not tell bit of foreshadowing that they put into it. And I liked it. So yeah, that's pretty much it for Dune 2021, Mark. It's a bit of a sad. You don't sound too happy about that.
Well, it's still not done yet, is it?
No, we're not. No, we're not. As of recording, I shall be seeing the film tomorrow at 2:30, maybe 2:30, 1:30 p.m. I think it is. So I'm excited. Looking forward to it. It's getting good reviews.
I'll make a point of trying to catch up the movie as and when I can. I've got no plans to see it just yet, but I will be making a point when I've got the opportunity to watch the movie.
All right. Okay then. So how do you feel? What's your bottom line of this movie then?
I feel that researching this movie has made me appreciate it more. At the time when we first started these reviews, I was a bit more kind of... I was a little dismissive of some of the concepts of this story. But actually getting into it and actually seeing the different concepts that Herbert was putting into his story, I understand it better now, and I understand the sort of story he was trying to tell. I understand why the worm attack was only a paragraph, because it wasn't about the action, as you say. He wasn't concerned with that. He was concerned with the statement of the narrative. And it's interesting now that I can see that a little better. I mean, I'm not going to say I understand these stories and I get it, because these movies are deep, and this story is deep.
Yes. As I mentioned earlier on, the book is a flawed masterpiece, and it is like a monumentous achievement in literature. It's monumental, incredible achievement, as incredible as Lord of the Rings, really. And I've read like the first 3 books of Dune, and I wouldn't put it in the pantheon of the greatest. I probably would put Lord of the Rings in my top 10, maybe, I don't know, but like, it's important. They're both as important as each other. But it's definitely a story that deserves respect from the viewer. As I mentioned, I've read the book 3 times, and the second time when I read it, I did really scour the appendices to really learn all the language. And then when I came back to read it a third time, I found that I've enjoyed the book even more on repeated readings, the films as well. I've enjoyed more and more and more. And it's a giver. It's a real giver. You know, the more you put into this story, the more you can get out of it. There's a lot to unpack. And as I mentioned as well earlier on, Herbert doesn't present us with ideas. He presents us with ideas. He presents us with questions, but he doesn't give us the answers. The answers are for us to decide. And that's something I've always admired and liked in all writing, you know, to leave a bit of interpretation to the viewer. And, yeah, the more you put in, the more there is to get out with Dune. So it's fascinating work, and I need to finish the Herbert series. I know there's another trilogy to read, so maybe this year I'll get around to that. Maybe at some point we'll see what happens. So, but yeah, I definitely feel like the 2021 movie was, well, not perfect.
It was close.
It is a very, very good movie. I'm fine with slow movies personally as well. So, and it does take its time, and I'm glad it takes its time. You know, maybe part 2 will be a bit more action-packed. Who knows? The book is more action-packed, that's for sure. But we'll see. We'll see what happens. I'm looking forward to finding out. So yeah.
Yeah, man.
Well, I suppose we should probably talk about what's coming in the next episode, because we don't always do that, but I suppose we probably should this time. That's because we're going to be talking about the Big G. And I'm not talking about me, I'm talking about Godzilla. I know you're not as big a fan of Godzilla as I am, but I'm hoping you'll actually watch. Have you seen Shin Godzilla yet, Mark? Not Shin
yet.
Godzilla.
I will be. Oh, Godzilla 0.
Yeah, have you seen -1?
No, I haven't seen -1. So, but I'm going to be diving in over the coming days and giving myself a crash course in Godzilla. I mean, up until this point, I imagine this might have a couple of the hardcore fans gnashing their teeth, but my entire experience with Godzilla involves Matthew Broderick and the most recent King Kong crossover.
Well, as you know, as has been revealed, we record this podcast over the course of 2 weeks. So, you know, just like this episode, the first half we'll be talking about the origins of Godzilla and probably some of the Japanese movies. And then we'll probably talk about the American universe in the first part, which you have seen. Mm-hmm. And then in the second recording session, I would like to do Shin Godzilla and Godzilla -1. So you've got 2 weeks to watch those films.
I reckon
basically you've got 2 weeks. So do your best to try and watch them.
I'll do what I can.
So, for information on the music I have used in this episode, please see the episode description. So, the podcast is finished, Mark. It's over. You can follow me at writer GM Groves on Twitter/X, Facebook, and Instagram. Mark?
You can find me sat at home, not afraid that any of you bastards could ever find me, because fear is the little death that brings obliteration. I will face my fear, and I will permit it to pass over me and through me. And when it has gone past, I will turn the inner eye to see its path. Where the fear has gone, there will be nothing. Much like my social media.
And with that, you will ride a sandworm off into the sunrise.
Absolutely.
If you want to read my work, check out the website in the podcast description. There you will find articles, reviews, and some fiction. So, without further ado, I will bid you farewell, and hopefully we will see you soon.
Catch you later.